Hello there, and welcome. I'm so glad you found your way back to this little pocket of calm. Tonight, we're walking out onto the American frontier, but not the one you see in the dusty, sun-bleached photographs. We're going to step outside into the darkest dark you can imagine. A night so complete that the air itself has a texture and a taste, and the sky is so stuffed with stars that you could almost hear them twinkle. Before we wander out into that night, let me ask a simple favor. If you're settling in, and this feels like the right place to be, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. And in the comments, I'd love to hear where you are tonight, and what the weather is doing outside your own window. It's a small ritual, but it makes this feel a little less like a broadcast and a little more like a conversation by a fireside. Now go ahead and let your body find the heaviness in the mattress. Turn the lamp off if you haven't already. Find that one cool patch on the pillow where the cotton still feels fresh, and pull the blanket up until it's resting just under your chin. Take a breath and let it out slowly. The story has you now, so you can stop holding on to your thoughts. Let's step into the darkness together, the way a family on the frontier would have done, as the last sliver of daylight drained from the sky, and the whole world shrank to the size of a single cabin. Picture the end of a long, ordinary day. The sun, a pale wintry disk, has just slipped behind the tree line or the vast, unbroken swell of the prairie. The work is over, but the chores are not quite done. There is one last, crucial task that marks the porous boundary between the living day and the sleeping night: the making of light. You watch as someone, perhaps a mother, perhaps an older sibling, reaches up to the rough-hewn wooden mantel where a pair of squat, unlovely objects sit. They are tallow candles, and the moment they are lit, the cabin's atmosphere changes completely. It's not just the flicker, although that is a miserly thing compared to the departed sun, sending jittery shadows lurching against the log walls. It's the smell. The frontier darkness had a distinct smell, a pungent perfume of last week's beef fat, burning on the mantel. Imagine the greasy, smoky tang of it unfurling into the room. These weren't the clean, crisp, honey-scented beeswax candles of a city church. A tallow candle was a product of necessity, made from rendered mutton or beef fat, painstakingly saved and purified just enough to hold a wick. As soon as it catches, a thin ribbon of dark smoke begins to curl upward, dancing with the drafts. The fume fills the cabin with a hazy, nose-tickling presence, coating the back of your throat with a faint animal richness. It's an acrid, intimate fog that gets into the fibers of your woolen shirt and the very pages of the family Bible. If you leaned in too close, a tiny black char would crumble from the wick, sending up a sharper plume. And because every bit of fat was precious, a candle wouldn't be allowed to burn freely just for comfort. It sputtered and guttered, needing constant attention, snipping the wick with scissors, or just pinching it between moistened, careful fingers, a tiny hiss, marking the moment the room briefly plunged toward shadow before brightening again. But mostly, it was the scent that defined the early evening, a reminder that light was not a clean, silent switch to be flicked, but a living, breathing, animal thing you had to share your air with. And of course, because that smoky, smelly light was so scarce and so much work, most families did exactly what you might instinctively want to do in such a cozy, sensory-blanketed room. They simply went to bed when the sun set. It wasn't just from the bone-deep fatigue of physical labor, although that was immense. It was an economic and sensory logic. Artificial light was too precious to waste on casual idleness. You would feel it, that slow, collective winding down. The last necessary fumbling in the hazy glow would cease. A pair of boots would be placed just so by the hearth. The tallow candle, having given its measured hour of service, would be carefully snuffed, not blown out in a dramatic, wax-spattering puff, but pressed dead with a damp snuffer, a candle doubter, or a simple tin cone. And in that sudden, absolute release from the greasy light, the darkness would rush in like a physical tide, and a profound quiet would settle. It's a rhythm as old as the body. You can picture the entire household slipping beneath quilts as the last ember faded, like a cabin-wide yawn. One moment there's a dim, smoky world of faces half seen. The next there is just the soft, rhythmic rustle of straw ticks and the steady communal breathing of a family surrendering to the night with the discipline of the sun itself. But the night on the frontier was not a single, solid block of sleep. It was a cycle, and you might find yourself stirring several hours later, blinking awake in the profound, inky blackness of the small hours. This is where the second shift of the frontier night begins, the shift ruled entirely by the sky. There were no clocks. A ticking mantle clock was a rare heirloom, an expensive marvel. Time, out here, was a celestial measurement. You would swing your feet out of the warm nest of blankets, the puncheon floor shockingly cold against your soles, and grope for your boots, not by any man-made light, but by the instinct of your own home. If you needed to check the stock or simply to step outside, you would walk to the door, lift the heavy latch, and enter a world rinsed clean of any man-made glow. And what a world it was. Without light pollution, the Milky Way was so vivid that on moonless nights you could see your own shadow cast by starlight. It was a ghostly, diffuse twin of yourself, stretched out on the silvered grass. Look up. Imagine the sky so stuffed with stars that you could almost hear them twinkle. It's a crowded, pulsing, impossibly deep river of light, not the faint, dusty smear we might strain to see on the edge of a modern suburb. This was a sharp, granular cascade of diamond chips, so bright the major constellations were nearly lost in the noise of their lesser brethren. And the color. It wasn't a flat, sterile white. There was a faint, soft blush of rose and ice blue in the heart of the great river, a cosmic texture you could almost reach up and feel. This star-stuffed canopy was not just a spectacle. It was a practical tool, the only clock a traveler or a restless sleeper could read. You'd glance up and know it was nearly 2 a.m. just by the handle of the drinking gourd. Before ordinary watches were common, people told time at night by the rotation of the Big Dipper and the position of Cassiopeia. The stars were the only clock, and everyone knew how to read them. The Big Dipper, what so many knew as the drinking gourd, performs a slow, majestic pirouette around the North Star, Polaris, every 24 hours. In the deep, cold silence of, say, a November night, you could step out of your door, your breath forming a temporary cloud against the impossible scatter of the Milky Way, and look toward the north. If the great cup of the Dipper had swung low to the horizon, as if dipping water from the earth, you knew it was still early in the evening's deep cycle. But if the handle was pointing straight down, the whole constellation having climbed and pivoted high overhead, you'd know without a single chime or gear that it was well past midnight, sliding toward that profound, quiet hour of 2 or 3 in the morning. Time was not a number on a dial. It was a silent, visual arc in the night's grand architecture, a story being told in the slow, steady turning of a starry handle. Meanwhile, while the rural homesteader was reading the drinking gourd's silent message in the clean air, a very different sensory drama was unfolding in the late frontier towns, a legacy of the 1870s onward. Here, the night had a different kind of punctuality, one announced not by a celestial body, but by a creaking axle. You're lying in a bed, perhaps in a boarding house on a dusty main street, and you hear it, the slow, rolling squawk of an unlubricated cart. It's the 2 a.m. cart that squeaked of a grim duty, its passage a secret everyone kept. These were the night soil men, and their work was a pungent but necessary mission. Before plumbing threaded its way under city streets, the privies, the small, dark, spider-webbed structures at the back of every lot, would fill. The night soil men came after midnight to clean them, their lumbering cart and patient, resigned horses moving through the alleys. And as they worked, the rest of the town would lie still as stones, holding their noses and pretending to be asleep. It was a delicate, communal fiction. You didn't hear, you didn't smell. You certainly didn't get up and look out your window at the silhouette of a man performing the world's most essential and grim task by the thin beam of a shuttered lantern. The air, for a brief, passing hour, would take on a thick, earthy, overpowering scent that made the tallow candle seem like a rose garden. It was a completely different kind of frontier clock, marking the deep, unsavory hours of the night, a choreography of decay and renewal that everyone depended on, but no one would ever mention at breakfast. And then the cart would creak on its way. The smell would slowly diffuse into the sagebrush, and the town would settle back into a purer silence, waiting for the first true light to paint the distant mountains pink. But long after the night soil cart had faded into history, and even while the tallow candles were still in use, in the most remote hollows, there came a beautiful, gentle bridge between the necessity of the daylight and the dream of education. In the most remote stretches of Appalachia, far from the town clocks and the night soil carts, the brilliant moon that turned the trail into a ribbon of light, so you could learn your letters, was a cherished, cyclical gift. Imagine a teacher having walked miles herself, unlocking the one-room schoolhouse not at the crack of dawn, but as dusk falls on a night when the moon is perfectly full. The moonlight schools were held on full moon nights, so children could walk the mountain paths lit by a great silvery moon, their primers in hand and the hoot of an owl as their tardy bell. The purpose was simple and deeply practical. During the days, those children were needed for the unceasing labor of subsistence farming. But when the moon was a fat, glowing pearl rolling up over the ridge, it bathed the entire landscape in a cool, photographic light, sharp enough to read by, bright enough to make the narrow, root-crossed trails safe to navigate. So they would walk, a quiet line of small figures emerging from isolated cabins, the moonlight so bright it cast crisp, black shadows that followed them like silent companions. Inside the little schoolhouse, the windows would be thrown wide open to the lunar glow, the silvery light washing over the wooden benches and the slates, mixing with the soft hum of crickets and the sight of moths, drawn not by a flame this time, but by a heavenly body, fluttering pale against the dark glass. It was a fact so poetic it stings the heart a little, that the very celestial clock face that told a farmer it was 2 a.m. was also a lamp to guide a child toward the alphabet, a soft, silent revolution of learning powered entirely by the vast, reliable machinery of the sky. And so the frontier night settles back into its deep, quiet rhythm, the way it always does. Picture the last sleepy child from the moonlight school safely home, the cabin door shutting with a soft whisper. The tallow candle has long since been snuffed, and its greasy perfume is a fading memory in the cool air. The sky is still performing its slow, majestic wheel, the drinking gourd swinging patiently on its eternal circuit. You are back in the gentle shelter of the dark, that original darkness which was not an absence of something, but a presence all its own, filled with smells and stars, and the soft necessary secrets of a world at rest. Just let your breathing follow the quiet pull of that world now, a deep, steady orbit around a place where the only light is the one you carry in your dreams. Imagine you are a child again, small enough that the log walls of the cabin seem to rise around you like the ribs of some great, slumbering creature, and the only light in the whole world is the one that flickers in the hearth. Outside the night has already swallowed the prairie, the forest, the distant thread of the creek, but in here the darkness is held at a polite distance, pushed back into the corners where it dozes like a tired old dog. The fire is not roaring. No, that would be a waste of precious wood. But it is a steady, companionable thing, a bed of coals that breathes out a soft orange light and the occasional pop of a knot giving way. And in that light, if you turn your head just right and let your eyes go a little dreamy, you can watch your family's shadows stretch across the rough-hewn logs, tall and slow-moving, transformed into something more than human. Your mother, bent over some task, becomes a gentle giantess whose shoulder brushes the ceiling, and your father, reaching to set another stick on the fire, unfurls an arm as long and tender as the branch of an oak tree. They are kindly giants, those shadows, and there is a curious comfort in seeing the people you love turned into something so immense and protective, as if the cabin wall were a storybook page, and the firelight were doing the telling all on its own. Now listen for a moment, beneath the crackle of the fire. There, that low, steady whir, a sound so constant that after a while you almost stop hearing it, like the beating of a heart you've known your whole life. That is the spinning wheel. Your mother. Or perhaps an older sister with her sleeves pushed up, and a strand of hair escaping her kerchief, is drawing wool into thread by the light of the hearth, her foot rocking the treadle in a rhythm as old as any song. The wheel turns and turns, and the spindle fills with a fuzz of new yarn, And as she works, she hums something without words, a melody that might have been brought across an ocean long before you were born and will be carried long after, just a tender looping of notes that stitches the evening together. Sometimes the creak of the big loom joins in from the other side of the room, where someone else passes the shuttle back and forth, a soft wooden knock and a pause. The hum of the wheel, the creak of the loom, the little whisper of fiber being twisted. They weave themselves into a kind of story, a bedtime story made of motion, one that you can feel in your bones without needing to understand a single word. It is easy, sitting on the floor with your back against a warm log, to let your eyelids droop and your thoughts drift, carried along on that patient, humming current. You could fall asleep right there, and many a frontier child did, bundled up like a little roll of dough on the hearthstones, perfectly content. But then another sound rises out of the quiet, and your attention sharpens. Your father has picked up the book. It is a volume with a worn leather cover and pages softened by many thumbprints, and he opens it carefully, leaning a little closer to the flame of a single tallow candle or a rushlight that hisses faintly in its iron holder. This is the evening entertainment, the family's journey into another world, and you would not miss it for anything. You scoot closer, propping your chin on your fists, elbows digging into the rough puncheon floor, because you have to strain to catch every word. His voice is not loud. There is no need for that here, but it is clear and steady, carrying over the crackle of the fire, and it is telling the story of a pilgrim on a long and dangerous road. Pilgrim's Progress, that old, strange dream of giants and sloughs and shining gates, unfolds in the room like a map you can almost see. You might not grasp every heavy theological meaning, but you understand the fear of the dark valley, the relief of a friendly voice, the hope of a far-off morning. And there, in the warm, flickering half-light, with the shadows of your own giants moving gently on the wall, the story feels both very far away and very close, as if the pilgrim were walking just the other side of the hearthstone. You mouth the words you know, and when a particularly fine line is read, you glance at your mother to see if she is smiling. Meanwhile, the heavy, savory smell that has been thickening the air since supper does not really fade. It shifts into something else, something workmanlike and enduring. On the hearth, a small cauldron hangs on a crane, and the fat inside it bubbles softly, a translucent golden liquid that occasionally sends up a slow, greasy bubble. This is the other work of long winter evenings, rendering fat for tallow candles, dipping them one after another, and your mother's hands are red and sore from the endless procession. You can see her, maybe, pulling a length of twisted wick from the hot tallow, holding it up so the excess drips back into the pot, then hanging it on a rack where it will harden. The candles cool in cloudy grey rows, a little army of light-to-be, and they smell powerfully of Sunday dinner's leftovers, that rich animal scent of roasted meat gone cold on the plate, mixed now with a faint scorched note from the fire. It is not an unpleasant smell, exactly. Your stomach might even give a small, traitorous grumble of recognition. But it is heavy, so heavy you could almost lean against it. And you watch as your mother winces slightly when she flexes her fingers. The skin around her knuckles cracked from the work and the dry winter air, and yet she doesn't stop. She hums a little more quietly as she dips, her hands moving with an automatic grace, and the rows of cloudy grey candles grow longer by the minute, a kind of quiet harvest being laid by against the dark. Of course, a frontier evening does not always glide by so peacefully. Sometimes, when the wind shifts and a branch scrapes against the chimney, or when the sound of a distant howl threads through the chinks in the logs, a different current moves through the room. The reading voice pauses mid-sentence. The spinning wheel slows and stops. The hands dipping candles freeze in the air. No one says a word. In that sudden stillness, you can feel your own heart thumping loud in your ears, and you lie perfectly still, not daring to swallow, every muscle in your small body rigid as you listen with an intensity that is almost painful. Your parents are listening too, heads cocked, eyes flicking toward the door, and for a long stretched-out moment the whole family practices a hardening of silence together. Is it a stray dog, nosing around the woodpile? A branch, after all? Or is it something more dangerous, something with intention? The quiet is a living thing, and it asks a question none of you want to answer. Then, eventually, the sound does not repeat itself, or a familiar hoot of an owl reassures everyone that the night is simply going about its usual business, and the tension releases in a collective breath you didn't know you were holding. Your father clears his throat and finds his place on the page again. The wheel takes up its rhythm, your heart slows back to a reasonable trot, and you let your chin sink once more onto your fists, grateful, without quite knowing for it, for the ordinary miracle of safety. But of all the things the firelight sees, few are as tender as what happens when a child falls ill in the night. Perhaps you are that child now, or were on some particular evening you'd rather forget, waking from a troubled sleep, with a throat that feels like burlap and a head full of fog. The cabin is dimmer now, the fire turned to vermilion coals, and yet there is movement. Your mother is there, of course. Mothers on the frontier seem to possess a second sight for a feverish whimper, and she is stirring something into a cup. The steam of valerian tea curls up into the air, carrying a thin, rooty aroma, earthy and faintly bitter, not entirely pleasant, but somehow deeply reassuring, the smell of something that means help is on the way. The steam mixes with the faint smoke of the rushlight and the lingering ghost of tallow, and as she brings the cup to your lips, the steam whispers a promise you can barely hear, but that you believe with your whole being. You'll feel better when the sun comes up. Then her cool hand rests on your forehead, a balm in itself, smoothing back your damp hair, and she might murmur something. Not a full song, just a few soft syllables. There now, and the fire casts her shadow on the wall, a giant once more, but a giant who is entirely, infinitely gentle. You may not remember the exact taste of the tea later, but you will remember that cool hand, that soft murmur, the way the whole cabin seemed to hold its breath around you, willing you back toward rest. So the evening winds on. The work gentle and relentless, the pleasures small and hard won. The last of the wicks are dipped and hung, a fresh row of candles that will one day push back the dark, just as their ancestors did tonight. The book is closed with a soft thump. A marker slipped between its pages, the pilgrim left halfway up a hill where he will wait patiently for tomorrow. The spinning wheel gives a final, satisfied whir and falls silent, the spindle now heavy with a fresh, even thread. One by one, the tall figures on the wall dissolve back into ordinary people, stretching their backs and banking the fire for the night, their voices low and full of the comfortable gravel of the hour. You, if you are still awake, are gathered up and carried to a bed of straw ticking or a loft under the eaves, tucked into a warmth that smells of woodsmoke and wool, and the faint, unshakable aroma of Sunday dinner's leftovers. The hearth's glow has been the single, glowing center of the entire world. For these few hours, a tiny orange sun holding a tiny universe in its orbit, and now it is dimming, the coals blinking out one by one like sleepy eyes. You can let your breathing follow that gentle dimming, the quiet pull of the darkness that waits outside, not as something to fear, but as a presence all its own, filled with the secret hum of a spinning wheel that still echoes in your ears, the steam of a tea that promised morning, and the kindly giants who will still be there when the sun comes up. Just let the hearth of your own dreaming do its work now, steady and warm, until even the last little spark of thought gives way to rest. Imagine you are 7 years old, or maybe 9, and the cabin has wound down to the last, slow breath of the day. The fire that was a storyteller's stage an hour ago has now pulled its company of shadows into the corners to sleep, and what remains is a single, winking bed of coals, breathing orange, and then grey, and then orange again, like a friendly old dog dreaming of rabbits. Your mother lifts the warming pan from its hook, a long-handled brass saucer that has been filled with hot embers from the hearth, and she glides it beneath the quilt on the big bed, smoothing the cold out of the sheets with a practiced, whispering stroke. That sound, the metallic shush, and then the soft hiss of the metal against the ticking, is the official announcement that the big sleep is about to begin. And it really is a communal event, this bedding down. There is no hallway to vanish down, no separate room to retreat to. The family exhales together, a cabin-wide yawn that starts with your father, stretching his arms until his knuckles nearly brush the rafters, and ends with the littlest one, the baby, giving a milky, toothless sigh from the cradle by the hearth. You can feel the pull of it, the collective surrender to rest, as inevitable as the river's low gossip just outside the door. That river is a constant, by the way, a liquid murmur that you sometimes forget about during the day, but that comes back every night, singing the same soft, watery song it has sung since before the cabin was built. A song that says, nothing to worry about, nothing to see here, just water going where it's always gone. It will tuck you in as surely as any blanket. But first, there is the negotiation of the sleeping arrangements. In a one-room cabin of roughly 16 by 18 feet, with a loft above that traps the day's heat and smells faintly of dried apples and dust, everybody had a spot that had been argued about and settled long ago, though apparently never to everyone's permanent satisfaction. Your eldest brother, the one who is nearly a man, gets the privilege of climbing the wooden pegs up to the loft, where he sleeps on a pallet so close to the shingles that on summer nights he can hear the scritch of a curious raccoon's claws right above his head. You, meanwhile, share a wide rope bed with your sister, a contraption that groans whenever anyone so much as blinks, its ropes tightened with a wooden key that always seems to go missing. And it is to this bed that you now shuffle, in the deep, inky blackness that floods the room, after the candle has been pinched out, and the only light left is the faint, friendly blush of the dying embers. Now there is an inconvenient truth about all that water-like a lullaby business outside, and it is this: what goes in must, eventually, come out. Every frontier child knew the bedtime terror of the outhouse after dark, a structure that seemed, in the absence of sunlight, to have migrated about 40 miles into the woods, upwind of a bear's parlor. So the necessary chamber pot lived under the bed, a porcelain vessel of last resort, known grandly, in polite company, as a thunder jug, and some nights, despite your best efforts to limit your intake of the switchel, or the cool water from the gourd dipper, your body would send you an urgent, undeniable telegram. You lie there, rigid, calculating the distance from your warm nest to the edge of the bed, the drop to the splintery floor, and the blind, groping reach into the cold void beneath. The reluctant shuffle in the icy blackness is a ballet of sheer will. You ease one foot out from under the quilts, and the air bites it instantly, a sharp, dry cold that makes you consider, just for a second, a life of complete and utter stillness. But the message is insistent. You slide down, toes curling, until they touch the wide, rough-hewn plank of the floor, and you pray with a fervor you normally reserve for lightning storms. That you won't stub your toe. The word toe feels so small and fragile in your mind. You know exactly where the offending leg of the bed is, a thick maple post rounded smooth by years of hands, but in the dark it is a hidden stone waiting for your most delicate joint. You move like a heron stalking a frog, slow and deliberate, arms out, until your fingers find the cool, glazed rim of the jug. The relief is almost too quiet to acknowledge, a private treaty signed in the dark. And then you must make the return journey, back up into the bed that now feels like a continent away, while your sister, far across the feathery divide, mutters and smacks her lips, deep in a dream of her own. Because the crackle of corn shuck mattresses. You can hear it even now, can't you? That crisp, papery rustle, like walking through a harvested field, but somehow contained in a striped tick the size of a small boat. Every time you moved, you announced it to the entire household. Your mattress was stuffed, fresh after the last corn harvest, the dried husks carefully stripped and laid in, and it was a matter of pride, but it was not, by any measure, quiet. Your sister, in her sleep, was a restless elbow, a creature driven by some dream logic to seek out and occupy every square inch of warmth. You would just find the perfect, toasty hollow, the spot where your own body heat had created a little pocket of summer, and then, thump, a sharp, bony elbow, the point of a small human pyramid, would find your ribs. You might shove back, gently, a nudge that was half annoyance and half affection, causing another cascade of rustling, a duet of corn husks that sounded, if you let your mind wander, like a family of tiny field mice throwing a very small, very secret party. Your mother's voice would float out of the dark, a low and murmured, "Shush now, settle down," and the party would cease, leaving only the sound of your own breathing and the slow, steady symphony of the night. But the cold was not content to just bite at exposed toes. It was a weight, a presence that seeped up from the dirt floor in the dog trot, and through the chinks between the logs, no matter how much mud and moss had been packed in. This is where the heavy bearskin robe came into its own, the great shaggy comforter that was the family's winter treasure. It was a frontier luxury, a well-laid bearskin used as a top blanket, and it smelled eternally of woodsmoke and the great, dark animal it once was. That smell was not unpleasant. It was deep and earthy, a little sweet, a little wild, a permanent ghost of last year's hunt. You would pull it up to your chin, and its weight on a cold night felt exactly like a firm, friendly hug from the wilderness itself. A creature that had decided, against all odds, to be on your side. The fur was dense and slightly coarse at the tips, but if you burrowed your nose in, you found the softer undercoat, and you could imagine the broad, slow heart that once beat beneath it. It tucked you in like a friendly bear, one who had ambled in from the woods specifically to keep watch over your dreams. Its massive paw a steady pressure over your chest that said, "I'm here, you're safe, nothing will pass me tonight." And still, for all that, the dark was very dark. It was not the dim, backlit dark of a modern room, where a gadget's sleepy eye blinks blue from the corner. This was a darkness so complete, it felt like a velvet blanket pressed against your face. A darkness that could make the familiar geography of your own home feel strange and vast. This is why, in many a cabin, you'd find the old woman's light. That might be your grandmother, or a great-aunt who had come west and now held court in the chimney corner, who kept a tiny, all-night candle or a slush lamp burning on the mantel. A slush lamp was a modest thing, a twisted rag in a saucer of grease. Not bright enough to read by, hardly bright enough to cast a shadow. But it was a tiny, steady flame that stood between you and the boogeyman. Its faint glow was a promise, a solemn contract written in light. That morning would come. You could wake up in the small hours, disoriented, your heart thumping loud in your ears from a dream you couldn't quite remember, and there it would be. A single, perfect, unblinking daffodil of light, holding the whole dark at bay. It flickered occasionally, swayed by a draft you couldn't feel, and you'd watch it, mesmerized, until your eyelids grew heavy and the flame stretched into a soft, liquid line, and you'd slip back under before you even knew you were gone. The way your heart thumped loud in your ears was a strange, private concert. When you lay perfectly still, not daring to swallow, the world inside your body grew as loud as the world outside. You could hear the rush of your own blood, a distant, oceanic sound, and the tiny, percussive click of your throat when you finally carefully let that swallow happen. It was a sound that seemed enormous. A boulder dropped into a still pond, and you were certain it must have woken everyone. You'd lie there, rigid as a fence post, listening for the sigh of a parent turning over, the creak of the ropes, but there was nothing. Just the slow, even breathing of 5 other souls, a gentle rise and fall like the tide. You might hold perfectly still, playing a game of statue, seeing how long you could go without moving a single muscle, until your arm began to tingle, and you'd have to relent, rustling the corn husks once more. It was in these moments you noticed the other night songs, the soft, rhythmic wheeze of your father's snore from the big bed, a sound that was grating in the daytime, but in the dark was simply a metronome of safety, proof that the protector was still there, still breathing, and from the loft, the occasional thump and mutter of your brother, who was likely dreaming of wide prairies and fast horses. The whole household slipped beneath quilts like a cabin-wide yawn, and each quilt was a storybook in its own right. This one was made from the scraps of your mother's wedding dress, a faded calico that felt as soft as a petal. That one was a log cabin pattern, its small, precise rectangles, pieced together from your father's old work shirt, and a remnant of your sister's baby gown. The quilting frames would have been set up in this very room. Weeks ago, the womenfolk gathered around, needles flashing in the hearth light, and now the finished product, thick with cotton batting, sealed in the heat. You could run your finger over the tiny, even stitches, feeling the topography of care. On the coldest nights, you'd pile 3 or 4 on, the weight so heavy it was like being gently pressed into the mattress by some benevolent force. You'd see your breath, a tiny puff of ghostly vapor, even inside the cabin, and you'd pull the quilt up over your head, creating a tent of your own warm exhalations. Inside that small, dark, cozy cave, You were not in a cabin on the edge of a vast, lonely wilderness. You were a badger in its set, a bear in its den, a mouse in a warm, dark, perfectly appointed hole, and there was nothing in the world but the sound of your own contented breathing. And that river, always that river, just outside the door. It didn't care if it was noon or midnight. It kept up its steady, low gossip, a constant rustling conversation with the sycamore roots and the smooth stones. On clear, cold nights when the air was thin, the sound carried with a bell-like clarity, a liquid whisper that seemed to run right through the chinking. It would sing everyone to sleep, a lullaby without words, a timeless, running promise. If you listened carefully, you could almost pick out different voices. The chuckling tenor where the water broke over a shallow gravel bar, the deeper, contemplative bass where it pooled by the old fallen willow. It was the original plumbing, the cabin's first and finest clock, and at night it washed away the day's dust and the day's small, scratchy irritations, smoothing everything down to a clean, shining stone of quiet. And so the big sleep would come, not as a single event, but as a gradual, gentle folding. The last ember would give a final, resigned pop, a tiny orange flare like a tired eye opening, one last time before it surrendered to grey. Even the old woman's light might gutter low in its dish of grease, the wick charring a little, the flame shrinking to a bead of blue. The heavy robe would rise and fall with your breathing, its smoky scent a dream of autumn woods. The thunder jug, your recent adversary, would sit quietly under the bed, a pale oval in the gloom, its duties fulfilled. And your sister, that elbowing, restless creature, would for once be still, her breath slow and sweet on the back of your neck. The great dark outside was not an enemy then, but simply a depth, a backdrop for the tiny, precious light of your own small life. You were tucked in, bundled up, anchored by the weight of the bear and the kindness of the quilts, your heart no longer thumping but beating in slow, even time with the river's song, a steady rhythm that carried you gently, imperceptibly, into the deep, silent, and perfectly safe country of sleep. And yet, for some, the darkness did not mean rest. Imagine, if you will, that you are not tucked beneath those quilts, breathing in the sweet scent of woodsmoke and bare fur, but are instead still awake, still working, your body moving through a night that feels bigger and older than any cabin could contain. The labor of the frontier did not always bend to the setting of the sun. Some tasks could not wait for morning, and some journeys had to continue through the small hours, when the world turned to water and shadow, and the lone flicker of a flame. So let us step out of the sleeping cabin now, leaving the thunder jug and the creaking ropes of the bed, and follow the course of a different kind of night, one where the river's cold kiss and the miner's sputtering light were your only companions. Picture a wagon train that has been crawling across the plains for weeks, the oxen lowing softly in the stillness. The day's heat has been a hammer on your back, and the sun-baked earth has cracked under the wheels. Now you reach a river, the Platte, perhaps, wide and silver, and deceptively calm under the starlight. The decision is made not in the morning, but here and now, in the deep velvet of midnight. The water is lower at this hour, the guide says, having melted less from the distant mountain snows, and the livestock, those great patient beasts, are calmer. They will not spook as easily when they cannot see the swirling of the current. So you begin. You can feel the change in the air first, a cool breath rising from the water's surface, carrying the clean, weedy smell of a living river. Then, the wheels cut the silence, no longer crunching over dry grass, but hissing into the wet, packed sand of the bank. The wagon tilts forward, and you slide on the wooden seat, your hand gripping the sideboard. You hear the first nervous whinny of the horses, a low, questioning sound that vibrates in the dark. And then, you step down into the shallows, your boots sinking into the cold mud, and you lead the team forward. That is when it hits you. Not a gradual chill, but a sudden, breathtaking gasp as the icy current spills over the top of your boot and climbs your leg to your knee. It is a cold so pure and sharp it feels like a bell ringing deep in your bones, a shock that stops your breath for a long moment and sends a constellation of shivers dancing up your spine. The river is not just water, it is a living, pushing force, a muscle of meltwater flexing against your legs. Beside you, the wagon lurches, its wheels finding the uneven riverbed, and for a sickening second, it heels over like a rickety boat caught in a sudden gust. You brace against it, your shoulder digging into the wet wood, your feet scrambling for purchase on the slick, rounded stones below. The sound is a turmoil of groaning axles, the splash and churn of hooves, the jangle of trace chains, and the hushed, urgent voices of other settlers, coaxing, murmuring words that are less about meaning and more about tone, a steady rhythm of reassurance. Easy now, easy there. The water is up to your thighs now, and you can feel the wagon wanting to float, to become a strange, rudderless vessel. But slowly, so slowly, the angle changes. The wheels find the upward slope of the opposite bank. The horses, snorting and shaking their heads, pull you from the river's grip, and you emerge on the other side, your clothes streaming, your legs numb and alien, the night air suddenly feeling almost warm against your soaking skin. You have crossed a piece of the continent in the dark, and the only witness was the water itself. Now, shift your gaze from the shallow plains river to a much broader, deeper flow, the great liquid highway of the Ohio or the Mississippi. Here, nighttime on the water was not a crossing but a way of life. Imagine yourself on a flatboat, a clumsy, square-nosed arc of lashed green timber, drifting south with the current, piled high with barrels of salt pork, sacks of grain, and perhaps a crate of live chickens clucking softly in their dreams. The day had been a business of sweat and poling, and keeping an eye out for snags. But now, as the last stain of twilight fades, the boat is tied up for the night against a willow-crowded bank. The work is done. The lap of water against the hull is a constant, gentle sound, the very lullaby that had sung the children to sleep back in the cabin, now amplified into a soft, percussive symphony all around you. It is a sound so steady, so perfectly rhythmic, that it becomes a kind of silence in itself. In this wet, breathing darkness, another sound rises. A single, reedy note coaxed from a fiddle. The flatboatmen are not sleeping. There on the roof of a cargo box, his legs dangling over the edge, a man draws a bow across the strings. He is not a concert violinist. The tune is simple, catchy, a bit of a half-remembered jig. It is The Hunters of Kentucky, a song about the Battle of New Orleans, and it skips out over the black obsidian water, its notes sharp and merry. The music does not command the night, it simply joins it. You can almost see the way the sound drifts across the river, a cheerful ghost of a tune, mixing with the deep, resonant creak of the great steering oar flexing against its lock, and the occasional startling splash of a catfish, a heavy silver flash of sound that breaks the surface and is gone again. The fiddle weaves between these noises, a thread of human joy stitching itself into the fabric of the wild, dark world. A lookout sits at the bow, but his gaze is not on the stars. He is watching the river's surface for the subtle V of a canoe, listening for a whisper that is not the wind, wary of the river pirates who knew these dark bends and hidden inlets. But the fiddle plays on, a small, brave spark of melody that says, "For this moment we are here, we are alive, and the dark river is a friend, not a foe." The tune ends, and the silence that follows is just as full, just as deep, filled only by the water's lap and the rustle of some unseen creature in the cane. A little later, another song might drift across the water, a slower one this time, an old, sad air from the Highlands of Scotland or the Glens of Ireland, a tune that sounds like longing poured into the night, and it travels miles on that liquid highway, a gift to anyone, on either shore, who happen to be listening in the dark. But there is another kind of night work, one that took you not across the water, but deep, deep into the skin of the earth itself. Imagine yourself as a miner during the Great Gold Rush, and the sun has not mattered to you for days. You are a creature of the underground. Your workday, if you can call it that, is measured not by the arc of the sun, but by the burning of a single candle. You stoop in the low, cramped tunnel, the air thick and wet, and smelling of ancient, forgotten rock. It is a cold so different from the river. It is a dense, unyielding chill that seeps through your rough wool shirt and settles into your joints. And your entire world is a sphere of light no bigger than a dinner plate. That light comes from a sputtering wick, a stub of tallow you mounted on the front of your soft felt hat with a simple blob of sticky clay. It is a ridiculous, ingenious piece of technology. Every time you exhale, The tiny flame dances and gutters, a frantic, silent partner to your every breath, sometimes nearly winking out and plunging you into a darkness so absolute it feels like a physical pressure against your eyes. In that deep, wet blackness, the little golden bubble of light is more precious than anything you might chip from the quartz. It is, quite literally, your only dance partner in the mountain's belly. You move together, you and the flame, in a slow, careful duet. You lean in to inspect a seam of rock, and the flame leans with you, illuminating the sparkle of mica with an intimate, conspiratorial glow. You draw back to swing your pick, and your shadow explodes into a vast, lurching giant that flickers across the jagged walls. The quiet down there is not peaceful. It is a watchful, heavy sort of quiet, broken only by the slow, echoing drip of water somewhere deeper in the mountain, a sound like a metronome counting the centuries, and the soft, dusty thud of your pick. You pause, your back aching, and the candlelight catches a droplet of water on a granite wall, turning it for just a second into a tiny, suspended diamond. Then it plops, a cold kiss on the back of your neck, and you shiver. You are a mole, a very purposeful, industrious mole, chasing a rumor of gold through a labyrinth of silence and stone. The thought of the surface, of fresh air and the wide, star-scattered sky feels like a dream you had once, a long time ago. The only real thing is this small circle of warm light and the cool, patient heart of the mountain around it. When the candle finally burns down to a nub, threatening to scorch the clay, you know your shift is over. You crawl back toward what you hope is the exit, following the faint thread of moving air, leaving the thousand-year darkness to close in once more behind you. And in all these places, out on the shaking river crossing, adrift on the wide, slow waterway, or sealed in the granite deep, the night had its own voice. Often it was the voice of a bird. Listen, and you can hear it now, cutting through the dark from a copse of ghostly birch, the repetitive, insistent chant of the whippoorwill. Whippoorwill, whippoorwill. It called its own name so persistently, so rhythmically, that you could almost set your pocket watch to it, if you had one. The sound was the pulsing heartbeat of the frontier night, so constant that frontier folklore held a quiet, strange belief that if the whippoorwill's voice suddenly fell silent as you passed, it meant death was walking close behind you. So you'd listen, counting the calls under your breath, finding a strange comfort in its monotonous, unceasing lullaby, grateful that it had no cause to stop. And on the northern plains, far from any river or mine, the night itself could put on a show that would make you forget your freezing feet and aching back. A settler, perhaps stepping from a sod house in the middle of the night to check on a restless horse, would look up and see it. The sky would begin to dance. Great, silent curtains of green and pink, and sometimes a ghostly, shimmering violet, would ripple from horizon to horizon, unfurling like some celestial banner. They had no word for the aurora borealis, not then. What they thought they were seeing, what the folklore whispered, was a reflection of the great buffalo herds, millions upon millions of them, stampeding across a prairie in the spirit world. It was a good omen, they said, a promise of a successful hunt, a sign of abundance painted in the heavens. You would stand there, shivering in your nightshirt, your mouth slightly agape, your head tilted all the way back, watching the sky fold and unfold in ribbons of impossible color. The cold was forgotten. The work was forgotten. You were just a small, breathing speck, standing on the dark curve of the earth, looking up at a light show that asked nothing of you but your quiet, humble awe. So the night work was not just toil. It was a different way of being in the world. It was the gasp as the icy current hit your knees and the wagon lurched like a rickety boat, connecting you to the raw physical shock of the land itself. It was the fiddle tune drifting across the black water, mixing with the splash of a catfish and the creak of the oars, a defiant thread of human melody in the vast, indifferent dark. And it was the sputtering wick that was your only dance partner in the mountain's belly, a tiny, solitary sun in a universe of stone. These tasks, after dark, took people out of their safe cabins and placed them directly into the elements, where the night was not something to be feared from behind a door, but a vast living fabric they were woven into, thread by thread, candle by candle, note by note. And as the river continued its soft, steady song, and the stars turned slowly overhead, Even these wakeful souls would feel the pull of the hour, a gentle weight on the eyelids, a slowing of the breath, and know that their own time for rest, deep and dreamless and safe, was finally, gratefully, drawing near. Picture yourself now on a vast open plain, far from the snug cabins and the low gossip of the river. The air is a different creature out here, moving in long, slow breaths across an ocean of grass that has no far shore, only a horizon that has finally, after a long day, swallowed the sun. The last smear of orange is fading in the west, and the sky is shifting from a deep, aching blue into a kind of velvet so dark it feels like you could sink right into it. The first stars aren't just appearing, they're being poured out, one by one, a careless spill of diamond dust across the vast inverted bowl above you. This is the world of the open range night, the world of the cattle drive, where sleep is a different kind of ritual, a conversation between a man, the earth, and 1,000 breathing shadows. Out here, the very first star of evening wasn't a star at all, but a spark. It was the warm, amber flicker of the camp cook's fire, a beacon you could see for a mile, drawing the riders in from the far-flung edges of the herd like moths to a promise. And as you rode toward it, a gentle, familiar nicker might reach your ears, a soft, chuffing sound that wasn't part of the herd. This was the gentle nicker of the night horse, waiting for you by what passed for a camp, and if you were a cowboy on the trail, that sound was the most reassuring music in the world. You might think of it as your insurance policy on 4 hoofs. You see, the day horse you'd been riding for the last 14 hours, the one whose every muscle and mood you knew, was done. He'd be unsaddled, given a roll in the dirt and a long drink, and turned out with the remuda to graze. But the night horse, that was a different soul. He was fresh, keen-eared, and steady in the dark, chosen precisely because he wouldn't spook at a shadow or bolt at the scent of a wolf. He was the one who would carry you through the long, quiet hours of your watch, his sure feet navigating the unseen dips and gopher holes while your eyes were fixed on the restless sea of horn and hide. That soft nicker was a greeting. Yes, but it was also a quiet statement of fact. I'm here. We're in this together. The night can begin. And so, after a supper that was more ritual than meal, the night truly settled in. The cook would have dished out your share from a Dutch oven, maybe some sourdough biscuits and a ladle of beans that had been simmering all day. But the first thing you'd notice wasn't the food itself, but what it tasted like. It was the tangy perfume of a chip fire that made your coffee taste like the prairie wind. You see, on the Texas plains, timber was a thing of myth. A tree was something you drew on a map so you could avoid it. Your fuel wasn't logs of oak or pine, but the very ground you rode over, in the form of dry mesquite roots, or most famously, buffalo chips. Now, a chip is a polite word for a dried buffalo dropping, and calling it fuel was an act of frontier poetry. The cowboys, with a humor as dry as the fuel itself, might call it prairie coal. When you tossed a handful onto the embers, they didn't crackle into a roaring blaze. They caught with a slow, gentle certainty, and burned with a pale, almost ghostly flame, giving off a thick, sweetish smoke. It was a spicy, earthy, tangy perfume, a scent nothing like woodsmoke. It was the smell of sun-baked grass, ancient ecosystems, and a kind of wild, clean decay, a fragrance that defined a whole region of loneliness. And that smoke drifted with a purpose. It curled around the blackened coffee pot, infusing the thick, chicory-laced brew with a flavor that was entirely its own. Not quite skeet, not quite earth, but the very essence of the open range. It was a taste that said you were somewhere else, somewhere the maps gave up. And, as an added practical kindness, the fragrant cloud wreathed around your head as you hunched over your tin plate, gently persuading the clouds of mosquitoes to go and bother the cook instead. Soon, the easy murmur of conversation would begin to die down. The last tin cup would be scoured with sand and grass. The vast, star-dusted dome above was now complete, and beneath it the great herd was bedding down. 1,000 head of longhorn cattle, maybe 2,000, would settle into a vast living carpet, a single dark mass that shifted and sighed on the prairie. It was a sight so immense it was almost abstract, a low, dark island in a sea of silver grass. In the deep velvet dark, you could no longer see their individual hides. Only the pale, slow-swaying tips of their horns, thousands of them, catching the starlight and looking for all the world like a floating field of ivory daisies stirred by a phantom breeze. And it was into this profound, fragile stillness that you, a lonesome figure on horseback, would ride out for your shift, your night horse's hooves making no more sound than a heartbeat in the soft, muffling dust. The world was reduced to two sounds. The first was a steady, muffled sigh, a great, rhythmic whoosh like the tide of the world's largest, gentlest ocean. That was the sound of 1,000 animals breathing as one, an immense and soft respiration that rose and fell under the silent stars. And into this oceanic breath, you would begin to weave the second sound. It would start low, almost a hum in your own chest at first. A melody so simple and so old it felt less like a song you'd learned, and more like something your bones had always known. This was the lonesome croon that mixed with the cattle's breathing to make the world fall asleep. They called it the Texas Lullaby, or sometimes just a night herding song, but those names are too studied for what it was. It wasn't a performance. There was no audience but the stars and the stock. It was a sonic fence, a gentle auditory hand on the shoulders of 1,000 half-wild animals. The words, if there were words, were a shapeless, gentle poetry, a tuneful confession to the dark. "Oh, lay still, little doggy, lay still." You might murmur, the sound drifting from your lips like a long, slow ribbon of smoke. "Don't you hear that night bird calling?" The doggy, of course, was the motherless calf, the most nervous member of this floating city of beef, and the song was his tranquilizer. The melody would wander, low and meandering, its verses and refrains blurring into one endless, unspooling thread of sound. It mingled perfectly with the soft, rhythmic breathing of the herd, the steady footfalls of your patient night horse, and the distant, high-pitched yipping of a coyote who was offering his own the night. Your voice would rise and fall, almost imperceptibly, a signal to the dozing longhorns that a human, a friend, a steady presence, was walking the perimeter of their dreams. You were a clock to them, and the tick of that clock was a three-quarter-time waltz in your throat. After a few hours of this gentle guardianship, another rider would appear out of the gloom, his presence announced only by the soft jingle of a spur and the quiet inquiry of "How's she riding?" You'd pass on the report. "The herd's settled, the northern edge is a little skittish. There's a steer with a limp by the draw," and then you'd turn your horse back toward the dying gleam of the campfire. Now came your own time for rest, the final and most personal ritual of the night. You'd step down from your saddle, your legs feeling a little bowed, your body weary in a way that felt honest and complete. You'd pull the bridle from your horse and turn him back into the remuda with a grateful pat on his sweat-caked neck. Then you'd reach for your bed. A cowboy's bedroll, his sanctuary, was known as a sugan, a word with a soft, comforting shape that sounds exactly like what it was, a warm, woolly embrace. You'd find your spot, maybe a little hollow slightly sheltered from the wind, maybe just a flat piece of ground you remembered from a few hours ago. You'd kick away the biggest rocks and scorpion weeds, then hoist the sugan from the ground. And then there it was, the crackle of the tarpaulin as you unrolled your bedroll under a blanket of stars, a sound so specific, so full of promise. The outer layer was a heavy canvas tarpaulin, waterproofed and stiff with trail dust, and it made a crisp, starched sort of rustle as you spread it on the earth. Inside, layered with the precision of a French pastry, were the soft, warm quilts and blankets, a few of them lovingly pieced together by a mother or a sweetheart you hadn't seen in a year. You'd lay it all out flat, this small, rectangular declaration of home on a continent of grass. Your saddle, that rigid leather throne you'd sat in all day, would now be dragged to the head of the sugan to serve as a windbreak and a pillow. It smelled of horse sweat and leather oil, a scent more familiar and more comforting than any lavender. You'd tug off your tall, high-heeled boots, the stitching along the tops embossed with the memory of 1,000 stirrup rubs, and set them upside down on their heels, a small, shrewd act of frontier wisdom to discourage a scorpion from thinking they were a newly available cave. Your heavy wool pants and shirt would usually stay on, the only pajamas you owned, and you'd unbuckle your gun belt and coil it by your head, the brass cartridges, in the loops, feeling cool against your fingertips. Finally, you'd lower yourself down, wriggling into the warm, sweet nest until the canvas and wool cocooned you. with a long, slow exhale that released the day, the dust, and the low-grade vigilance, you'd pull your broad-brimmed hat over your eyes, not to block the sun, but to keep the dew from your face, and to give yourself a private velvet darkness of your own making. The last thing you'd feel before the world dissolved was the solid, grounding weight of that hat on your forehead, a final roof, a full stop. And in that moment, just before sleep claimed you, a prayer might float through your mind, as it did for every man who slept on the bare ground. It was a simple, practical petition. Please, Lord, don't let a rattlesnake seek my warmth tonight. It wasn't a distant fear, but an understanding, a piece of shared frontier knowledge. A man in a sugan, radiating a gentle, steady heat into the cool night, was an irresistible heated mattress to a cold-blooded serpent. Every whisper of the grass, every faint rustle against the canvas edge, was a potential visitor slithering in for a cuddle you did not want. But tonight, the grass is still. The rattlesnakes are off hunting pack rats somewhere else. The only sound is the gentle, rhythmic whisper of the earth itself, your own breath falling into quiet synchronization with the distant, oceanic sigh of the sleeping herd. The coyote's wild serenade has softened to a few distant, sleepy yaps. The tangy ghost of the chip fire smoke still clings to your clothes, a final breath of comfort. Above you, the star-stuffed blanket of sky seems to press down with a gentle, reassuring weight. The Milky Way, a great, dusty river of light, flowing silently toward the horizon. There's no roof here, no walls, no lock on the door. You are nestled in the palm of the vast open world, your head on a saddle, a hat over your eyes, the crackle of the tarpaulin a fading memory. The world is doing its breathing all around you, a giant gentle lung. And you are a part of it, slipping away on a current of prairie wind and starlight, safe for this hour in the very center of the lullaby. Now picture yourself not under that great bowl of stars, but stepping into the warm hive of a cabin, shrugging off the night's chill. The work is done, the tools are hung, and a different kind of human labor is about to begin. The labor of joy, of connection, of keeping the great, dark quiet at bay with a communal heartbeat. This is the hour when the frontier shed its isolation and became a place of music, romance, and the tall tale, all spun together in the glow of a single fire. Imagine you can hear it before you see it. The insistent, rhythmic squeak of a fiddle bow dragging across rosin and string. It's a sound not of the concert hall, but of the woodshed, a tune called Sugar in the Gourd, or The Devil's Dream, played with more enthusiasm than precision. And the moment that tune catches the air, something chemical happens in the room. The long benches are shoved back against the chinked log walls. The puncheon floor, split logs worn smooth by bare and booted feet, becomes a dance floor. You'd see your shyest cousin, the one who blushes when a stranger asks the time of day, suddenly transformed. Her foot begins to tap, just a twitch at first, then a full stomp, and before she knows it, she's being swung into the center of the floor, her skirt flaring like a morning glory opening to the sun. The hobnailed boots of the men become a percussion section, a clatter and scrape that digs little crescent moons into the wood, a beat that you feel through the soles of your own feet, a rhythm that shakes the dust from the rafters and the weariness from your bones. The room is a swirl of motion and breathless laughter, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and warm wool, and for a few hours the wilderness outside might as well be another world entirely. Of course, where there's music and young people, romance is never far behind, flickering as delicately as a candle flame. And on the frontier, romance had its own quiet timepiece. Imagine you're a young suitor, freshly scrubbed, your hair slicked down with a little bear grease, sitting rigidly on a straight-back chair next to the object of your affection. Between you, on a simple table, stands a courting candle. This wasn't just any candle holder. It was a tall, spiral iron stand with a thumbscrew, designed for silent, polite negotiation. The girl's father, a man with eyes that missed nothing and a jaw set like a bear trap, would amble over as the evening began. Without a word, he'd set a fresh candle in the holder and screw the base to a specific height. The meaning was as clear as a bell on a quiet morning. When the candle burns down to that iron lip, your time is up. No gruff clearing of the throat, no pointed glance at the tall clock in the corner. Just the silent, patient physics of melting wax. You'd try to be charming, telling your best stories, all the while watching that warm golden flame slowly eat its way down the candle's body, a tiny, glowing hourglass. And when the wick finally sputtered and ducked beneath the brass rim, you knew your cue. You'd rise, bow, and take your leave, walking home under the moonlight, the silent waxen clock having kindly but firmly declared the evening closed. But not every rhythmic gathering was a proper dance. There was a loophole of faith and fun, a spirited gathering where you could clap and stomp with holy glee, as long as no one called it a dance. Picture a room packed with neighbors, the air buzzing with a pent-up energy. Someone starts a hymn, but with a syncopated beat, a hand patting a knee. Then another joins in with a clap, then another with a stomp of a brogan on the floor. It's a call and response rhythm that builds and builds, a joyful noise that shakes the window panes. They called it patting juba, or with a wink, just a good, clean spiritual exercise. The beat is infectious, a complex, layered percussion made entirely of the human body, palms slapping thighs, heels pounding the floorboards in a thundering bass line. You'd see an old farmer, his face a roadmap of hard years, close his eyes and get lost in the rhythm, his hobnailed boots beating a syncopated tattoo that would make a drummer weep. It wasn't a dance. Oh no, not a step was out of line. It was just praise, poured out through the soles of your feet and the clapping of your hands, a steam valve for the soul that left everyone breathless and grinning, a holy frenzy disguised as a percussive thunderstorm. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the night, on a moon-blanched courtyard of packed earth, love found its voice in a different key. Imagine a young vaquero or a lonely farmhand, his fingers calloused from rope or plow, cradling a gut-string guitar. He doesn't belt out a tune for a crowd. This is a private broadcast, a strummed message sent across the silvered darkness toward a window where a lamp still burns. The chords are simple, perhaps a lament from old Spain, or a melody brought over the mountains, but the feeling they carry is as complex as the star-patterned sky. You can almost hear the gentle, percussive thrum of his thumb against the strings, a sound more felt than heard, a heartbeat set to music. And from that dark window, he doesn't get an open door or a spoken word. His answer is the slow, deliberate creak of a wooden shutter, just a few inches, catching the moonlight. It's a silent conversation, a duet of hope and patience. He strums a line of longing. The shutter creaks a little reply. A sign that she is there, listening, his song a welcome anchor in her quiet room. The night air carries the music like a secret, a fragile, beautiful connections spun from horsehair strings and moonbeams. Now, a wedding on the frontier was a cause for a different kind of music entirely, a noise so wild and exuberant it would put the earlier fiddle to shame. This was the chivalry, and it was love in its noisiest disguise. Picture your honeymoon cabin, a sanctuary you've just sealed with a whispered vow and a heavy wooden latch. Sleep comes, deep and sweet, until it is shattered. Not by wolves or a storm, but by an unholy, magnificent racket. It's a chaotic orchestra of the entire community, tin pans clanging like demented cymbals, cowbells rattling, shotguns firing harmless blanks into the night sky, and the rhythmic thumping of spoons on washboards. It's a tin pan thunder that rattles the rafters and sends the cat diving under the bed. This was not an act of malice, but a rough and tumble blessing, a declaration that your private joy was a community concern. The only way to make it stop was to open your door and invite the cacophonous crew inside, offering up cider or something stronger, acknowledging that your marriage wasn't just a contract between two souls, but a new stitch in the patchwork quilt of the settlement. The noise would eventually fade into laughter and backslapping congratulations. But the memory of that loving, ear-splitting serenade would echo for a lifetime. Once the music fades and the company quiets, a hush falls. The hour grows late, and the chairs, still warm from the dancing, are pulled into a loose circle around the hearth. This is the time for telling, the moment when the night's energy shifts from the body to the imagination. A pipe is lit, a quilt is drawn up, and a voice begins, low and steady. Imagine you're a child bundled under a patchwork quilt, the fire's warm glow painting the storyteller's face as he leans forward. He tells you, with a face as straight as a plank, about a bear as big as a barn that he once tracked through these very woods. He describes its paw print, a depression in the earth, that a man could lie down in, with room to spare, now full of last night's rain and a family of confused bullfrogs. He tells you how he grinned at a coon until the embarrassed creature confessed its sins and climbed down the tree. The story unspools, a yarn woven not for fact, but for a deeper truth. It's a tale designed to make your skin prickle, not with fear of the dark outside, but with a kind of electric wonder. You'd listen, your eyes wide, and outside the wind might rattle the latch on the door, a sound that in that sudden tense silence sounds exactly like a claw the size of a dinner plate, scratching just once. The tall tale was a sacred act, a way of shrinking the vast impersonal wilderness down to a human scale, of filling the darkness with a voice that, however preposterous, promised that we were bigger, smarter, and far more entertaining than any monster the night could produce. But storytelling wasn't the only communal art form woven in the cozy glow of a candlelit cabin. Picture a different kind of gathering, a congress of women. Their chairs pulled close around a wooden frame stretched tight with fabric. This was the quilting bee, and the quiet laughter that punctuated the room was as important as the thread. You could hear the soft, rhythmic prick of a needle pulling through 3 layers, the sharp snip of a thread cut with tiny silver scissors, and under it all, a current of conversation. A quilt top, a riot of calico and old shirts, could be born in a single evening, stitched with a running commentary on crops and babies, on teas made from wild bergamot, and a remedy for a cow that's off its feed. The lamp, be it whale oil or a clutch of tallow dips, cast a warm, honeyed glow on the work, illuminating the intricate patterns. Jacob's ladder, the wedding ring, the bear's paw. Every scrap held a memory. This one from a girlhood dress, that one from a husband's Sunday best shirt that finally wore through at the elbow. The bees were a quiet engine of the community, a place where news was traded, and a woman's art was not a solo flight but a flock effort, the stitches a script of shared life, written in a language only they truly knew. And then, for a single watcher, there was the porch. After everyone had gone, after the stories and the stitching and the songs, an older man might pull a chair out into the mild night air and let the great performance of the insects begin. Imagine the creak of a rocking chair, a sound so familiar it was like the house's own breathing. Its rhythm, a steady back and forth, toe to heel, kept perfect time with the argument of the katydids. Katy did. Katy didn't. They rasped back and forth from the dark trees in their endless, scratchy debate. The rocker would stop for a moment, the old man perhaps tamping down a pipe, and the katydids would pause too, as if insulted by the interruption. Then the chair would resume its gentle to and fro, and the insects would pick up their tireless quarrel exactly where they'd left off. It was a quiet, unspoken duet, the human and the wild world keeping time with each other, rocking on the edge of sleep, a peaceful truce between a long day and the deeper night's rest. Perhaps the most profound communal gathering, however, was one that moved beyond a single cabin, spilling out under the heavens themselves. Picture a vast, starlit canopy over the woods of Cane Ridge, Kentucky. Thousands have gathered, their campfires and torch posts dotting the darkness like earthbound constellations. The air is thick with the smell of woodsmoke and crushed grass, the torch smoke rising like the very prayers being offered. This was a camp meeting, a spiritual bonfire that caught the frontier aflame. You wouldn't hear a single fiddle here, but a sound just as powerful, the collective moan and cry of hundreds. A great choral wave of human emotion that ebbed and surged through the night. It was a holy frenzy, a mass catharsis, where the rigid formality of Eastern churches dissolved into something direct and deeply personal. People would fall to their knees, overcome, their cries merging into a strange and powerful harmony. The preachers' voices, hoarse and urgent, would carry over the assembly, not so much delivering a sermon as stoking a fire that was already burning bright. In that flickering, smoky darkness under a dome of infinite stars, the individual was subsumed into something vast and trembling, a community forged in ecstatic release, a shared, sleepless night where heaven felt as close and as real as the torch smoke drifting past the moon. And as the night wore on toward dawn, the sounds would soften, the campfires would sink into glowing hearts of ember, and a great, exhausted quiet would settle over the people, a peace found at the very edge of the wilderness they called home. Imagine, You're walking down the single dusty street of a frontier town long after the sun has dropped behind the endless prairie. The air is still warm from the day, carrying that particular blend of hoof-churned earth, sagebrush, and the faint tang of woodsmoke from a dozen chimneys. Most of the town has settled in for the night. The mercantile is shuttered tight. The blacksmith's forge is a cold, dark cave. But from up ahead, a low, golden light spills out through the slats of a building that never quite seems to sleep. A dull, steady rumble of voices, a snatch of a laugh, and the occasional thump of something heavy on wood. This is the saloon, the beating heart of the frontier's commercial night, and the door swings open as easily as a familiar yawn, inviting you in out of the darkness. The first thing that hits you is the smell, of course. It's a thick, warm blanket of coal oil lamps, stale beer, sawdust, and the faint, animal scent of unwashed wool and leather from a dozen hard-working men. Above you, a row of lamps hisses softly, their flame shivering inside smoke-glass chimneys, painting everything in a wavering amber glow that makes the room feel like it's gently breathing. The light doesn't reach the corners, where shadows pool like spilled ink, but it catches the central tableau beautifully. A table ringed with men, their faces carved into expressions of careful neutrality, and the steady, rhythmic slap of pasteboards hitting the felt. It's a poker game, and the sound of the cards is a language all its own. A quiet, percussive whisper that speaks of bluffs and bets and the slow, hopeful slide of a coin into the pot. Picture yourself drifting closer, drawn by the quiet tension that hums around the table like a lazy bee. The men's hands move slowly, deliberately, as if underwater. You see the glint of a watch chain, the dull gleam of a tin cup, and then, in the smoky lamp glow, a tiny, bright star of reflected light. It's the barrel of a derringer, a little pistol no bigger than a man's palm, worn openly on a gambler's hip as a quiet, unblinking statement. It's not brandished, not even touched. It just rests there, a small, cold fact in a warm room. In a place like Deadwood in 1876, this same lampglow would have fallen on a hand of aces and eights, and on a man whose name has become a whisper in the night. You can almost see the scene settle into stillness afterward, the way smoke from a neglected cigar would curl upward, indifferent and slow, twisting toward the ceiling like a sleepy question mark. The cards would lie where they fell, that unlucky hand black against the pale felt. And on the table nearby, a glass of whiskey would sit half-finished, the liquid warm and still, waiting for a hand that would never lift it again. The moment wouldn't be loud. It would be a quiet full stop, the kind that makes the whole room feel suspended in amber for a breath or two. Before the ordinary business of the night sighed and carried on, the cards gathered, the chair pushed back, the sawdust absorbing everything. But there's no such stillness now, not in every corner. As you turn away from the card table, your attention is pulled by a different kind of rhythm altogether, a shaking, jostling pulse that you can feel coming up through the soles of your boots. It's coming from the far end of the room, where a crowd has gathered around a cleared space of floor, the planks worn smooth and shiny by countless nights of use. This is the dance hall, and at its center, a man is turning the crank of a hurdy-gurdy with a steady, circular motion. The instrument wheezes out a melody that is not exactly beautiful, but it is insistent and joyful, a reedy, buzzing tune that seems to stitch the air together. And on that shaking plank floor, in time with the hurdy-gurdy's melody, hobnailed boots are stomping with a rhythm that makes the whole building tremble. Now, hold your beer steady. You can't help but notice how the amber liquid in your glass shivers in concentric little rings, a tiny seismograph of the merriment. A hurdy-gurdy girl, her dress a bright, improbable splash of color in this dusty room, is being twirled by a miner whose face is a map of hard work and sudden, bewildered happiness. They dance for a ticket, a twirl, a prepaid little slip of paper that buys a minute or two of human connection, of a hand in yours, and a smile that mightn't be entirely for show. The floor bounces under the weight of it all, an almost nautical sway beneath the rough-sawn rafters. And you find yourself forgiving the sour note in the tune, the scrape of the bow against an imagined fiddle string, because the whole scene has the simple, unvarnished logic of joy. The hurdy-gurdy is soon joined by the deep plunk of a gourd banjo, its body a hollowed gourd, its strings humming with a resonance that feels far older than the town itself. And somewhere in the crowd, the bright metallic ping of a jaw harp adds a little impossible sparkle. It's a homemade orchestra, and under the dim, guttering glow of the grease lamps, the bare boards become a ballroom floor. You lean against a rough-hewn post and let the music wash over you, the vibration of it a friendly, persistent presence against your shoulder blade. And yet, even this is not the only music of the night. From somewhere behind the main room, through a low doorway hung with a stained blanket, comes another, deeper percussive soundtrack, the satisfying crash of wooden pins, followed immediately by a whoop of pure, boyish triumph. You push through the blanket, and the air changes. It's warmer, smokier, and thick with the smell of lamp oil and dusty, old wood. This is the bowling alley, a rough-hewn lane that runs the length of the back room, with oil lamps smoking overhead, their wicks glowing like little orange tongues in the haze. A man in his shirt sleeves is retrieving a wooden ball the size of a small pumpkin, hefting it with a kind of theatrical gravity before sending it rumbling down the planks. The ball makes a low grumbling sound, a bass note of sin, as it rolls, and then there is that crash, the pins scattering like a handful of thrown bones, a clean, percussive climax that never, ever gets old. An onlooker claps a hand on the bowler's back, and the whoop that follows is a sound of such uncomplicated delight that it's impossible not to smile. The 9 pins are set up again by a boy who moves with the practiced speed of long practice, his bare feet silent on the boards, and the next ball is already in someone else's hands. The rhythm of the game, the rumble, the crash, the whoop, the clatter of resetting, becomes a kind of lullaby for the back of the saloon, a pattern that your mind begins to anticipate, a steady beat beneath the hiss of the lamps. When you step back out into the main room for a breath of slightly cooler air, you notice that the night has deepened outside. The saloon doors are propped open now, and beyond them, the dusty street is a ribbon of darkness. But look, there, down a little alleyway and set a short distance from the main thoroughfare, you see a different kind of glow. It's the red lantern that signaled a different kind of welcome, its crimson gleam a soft, steady beacon in the dusty dark. The light it casts isn't harsh or garish. It's more like a blush on the face of the night, a quiet announcement. The building behind it is small and neat, its curtains drawn, and the sound that drifts from it is not the stomp of boots, but the distant, gentle tinkle of a parlor piano, a melody that slides through the cracks in the window frame like honey. A woman's silhouette passes briefly as against the thin light, and then is gone. There's no raucous laughter here, no crashing pins. The red lantern simply waits, a wordless promise of company, a lamp left in the window for a sailor on a sea of grass. Its glow is a calm, unlonely thing, and you watch for a moment as a figure, hat pulled low, steps from the boardwalk and is swallowed by the quiet door, leaving the street empty again, save for the ever-present whisper of the wind. And if you stand very still and let the sounds of the night settle around you, you might notice one more layer woven into the fabric of this place, a ghost note of a memory. The sawdust under your feet in the saloon, that soft sponge-like carpet, sometimes holds a sharper, sweeter tang than plain beer and tobacco. It's the smell of spilled whiskey, soaked deep into the wood fibers, a phantom scent that speaks of a different kind of crash. Picture a night, perhaps around 3 in the morning, when a temperance vigilante, a soul ablaze with righteous conviction, slipped into a quiet saloon, a hatchet in hand. You can imagine the arc of a swinging lantern casting a wild kaleidoscope of shadows on the wall as the first barrel splintered, the jagged crash of shattered glass, and the sudden, sharp, almost floral smell of good bourbon flooding the air, soaking into the sawdust with a dark, spreading stain. The act itself would have been explosive, a brief, violent punctuation, but now, in the quiet of your own imagining, all that remains is the faint, distant perfume of the spilled sin, a story that the floorboards could tell if they could speak. It's just another layer of the night's complex perfume, a reminder that the saloon was a place of fierce appetites, both satisfied and suppressed, and that the sawdust was always ready to absorb it all, to silence it, to turn it into just another faint, fading note. But now the hour is growing very late. The hurdy-gurdy has fallen silent, its cranked melody tucked away for the night, and the dancers have drifted out into the cooling air, their boots now quiet on the walkway. The poker game has broken up, the pasteboards stacked into a neat, silent deck, and the chair where a man once held aces and eights is just an ordinary chair again, pushed back against the wall. In the back room, the bowling pins stand in a patient, upright row, and the last ball has been placed in its cradle, the whoops and crashes now just a ringing in the ear's memory. Outside, the red lantern still glows, but its light seems softer now, drowsier, as if the night itself is beginning to yawn. The lamps in the saloon are being turned down one by one, their smoke curling upward for a final time, and the great plank-floored room settles into a deep, breathing quiet. You step out onto the boardwalk, the dust cool under your shoes, and the only sound left is the far-off, lonesome whisper of the wind threading its way through the darkened town, carrying with it the scent of the prairie and the promise of sleep. Now, as the wind threads its way down the darkened street, it carries with it more than just the scent of the prairie and the promise of sleep. If you were to follow that whisper, to let your feet carry you past the last slumping fence post, and into the deeper dark beyond the town's edge, you might discover that the night was never truly empty. It only seemed that way from the safety of your quilts. Out here, in the hollows and the drawers, under the starlight that doesn't quite reach the ground, the frontier was still very much awake. Only it had turned to a different sort of business, the kind that preferred no witnesses. Imagine for a moment that you are wandering down a creek bed, the stones smooth and cool under your bare soles, the water just a ribbon of black silk against your ankles. The air down here is thicker, holding on to the day's warmth longer than the open prairie, and it carries a note that doesn't belong to the creek or the cottonwoods. It's a smell that pricks at the back of your nose. Sweet, sour, a little like baking bread that someone forgot to finish and left to ferment in a bucket. That is the scent of mash, and it means you are no longer alone in the dark. Ahead, tucked into the elbow of a holler where the undergrowth grows thick and protective, you might catch a glimpse of something that is not quite a fire. It's a low, blue flame, dancing a quiet, almost invisible jig beneath a copper pot the size of a washtub. The flame is so shy, so carefully fed with dry, smokeless wood, that from 20 yards away you'd mistake it for a trick of the moonlight on a dew-covered leaf. But the steam that curls from the pot's cap, that sweet, sour steam in the dark hollow that meant tomorrow's jugs would be full, tells the true story. A man, his face lit only by that ghostly blue glow, moves with the patience of a heron, adjusting a coil of copper tubing, testing the drip with a fingertip. He's not a villain out of a penny dreadful. He's likely a farmer whose corn crop was worth more in liquid form than in sacks of grain, a man who figured the government a long way off had no business taxing his labor. He works in a silence so complete you can hear the individual bubbles forming in the mash, and the whole operation feels less like a crime and more like a quiet domestic ritual. A man making his morning coffee before the sun comes up, only his coffee pot is the size of a small car. You watch the steam curl up and vanish into the cedar branches, carrying that sour-sweet perfume off into the night, and after a while you step back into the shadows, leaving him to his gentle, illegal alchemy. Slip now away from the holler and back up into the open, where the moonlight paints the world in shades of silver and charcoal. Picture a ranch, all quiet, the house a dark block against the stars, the corral a neat geometry of peeled logs. Inside the house, honest folks dream their honest dreams. But just outside the corral, just before the moon dips below the horizon and the world holds its breath, something stirs. A shadow detaches itself from the trunk of a cottonwood, a shape so patient it might have been a rock a moment before. This is the nighthawk, and he is a student of the moon. He knows precisely how long its light will last, how many steps he can take before it abandons him to the deeper dark. Beneath his coat, a rope halter is coiled, soft and silent as a snake, and in his pocket, perhaps, a few lumps of sugar or a handful of stolen oats to make friends quickly. He moves without a sound that would trouble a sleeping dog, his feet finding the ground in a rhythm older than the frontier itself. The horse inside the corral, a good horse, a horse someone loved, lifts its head and snorts a question into the cool air. The nighthawk answers with a low murmur, a sound that is almost a lullaby, and the horse, curious or simply lonesome, ambles over to investigate. You can almost see the rope halter slip over the soft nose, the shadow leader, and the mount melting back into the tree line just as the moon gives up its watch. It's a theft, yes, but in the quiet of this hour, it feels less like a violent act and more like a strange, choreographed dance. Two silhouettes, one man and one horse, stepping together into the disappearing dark. Tomorrow there will be hard words and a tightening of the law, but right now, there is only the soft, muffled drum of unshod hooves on prairie grass, growing fainter and fainter until even the memory of the sound is gone. And what of the law itself, you might wonder, in a place where a sheriff might be a 2-day ride away, and the nearest judge even farther? Sometimes, on nights like this, the law came looking for you. Now, if you were to turn your gaze toward the hills above a California mining camp, where the shanties lean together like tired drunks, and the only permanent structure is the saloon, you might have heard a different sound entirely. It begins as a deep, rhythmic throb, a pulse you feel in the soles of your feet before you hear it with your ears. The drum of hooves. Not one horse, not two, but a dozen or more, riding in a tight, purposeful knot. As they crest the ridge, you catch the jittery light of lanterns, a constellation of bobbing yellow stars that throws crazy shadows across the rocks. The men beneath those lanterns have faces that aren't faces. They've pulled bandanas up over their noses, or wrapped their hats with dark cloth, leaving only the glint of eyes. This is the miners' court on the move, a committee of vigilance that did much of its work after sundown, when the deep cuts in the earth were still, and the men who would face their justice had nowhere to run. There's no yelling, no whooping, just the steady thrum of those hooves and the soft clanking of the lanterns, and the coiled presence of a rope that one man carries, looped over his saddle horn, neat and businesslike. It's a solemn parade, a rough and ready kind of jurisprudence that had no time for appeals. You picture them pausing outside a certain tent, a quiet conference of murmured voices, and then a man being helped onto a horse, not unkindly, but with a finality that needed no explanation. The lantern light spills out over the scene, and you can see the faces of the miners watching from their tent flaps, their expressions, a mix of relief and something else. Something that looked a little like a bad taste in the mouth. This was justice without a judge, dressed up in the trappings of a night ride, and as the sound of those hooves fades back into the darkness, the camp settles into a silence that is heavier than before. A silence that seems to be holding its own breath. But if the miners' courts were severe, there was another kind of night rider whose appearance was so peculiar, so dreamlike, that it felt less like rough justice and more like a peculiar lantern light pageant. Picture the Ozark Mountains, the hills like a crumpled quilt of oak and hickory, their hollows full of a mist that rises and curls like breath on a cold November night. It's the 1880s, and the Civil War is a scar that still aches. Here, some men decided that the law wasn't enough, and they took to riding the ridges in costumes that would make you rub your eyes and wonder if you were truly awake. They called themselves the Bald Knobbers, and on certain nights, you might see their torches winking through the trees, a long, snaking line of flame that seems to float above the ground. As they draw closer, you start to make out the silhouettes aflutter in the torchlight. Not monstrous, but strange, like figures from an old half-remembered folktale. Their hoods are trimmed with horns, not the wicked, spiraling horns of a nightmare, but something more like the primitive, almost innocent protrusions on a child's drawing of a devil, bouncing and wobbling with each step of their horses. The torchlight flickers across them, catching the glint of an eye through a cut-out hole, the twitch of a horse's ear, the dull gleam of a rifle barrel resting across a pommel. They ride in a quiet column, their purpose stern, but there's something about the way the horns wobble, the way the firelight makes the whole procession dance, that tips the scene away from fright and into the realm of the deeply odd. It's a silent morality play, moving through the woods, a strange, self-appointed circus of order. You might watch them for a long moment, hidden behind a broad trunk, the smell of pine pitch and torch smoke filling your nose, and when they've passed, the darkness they leave behind feels just a little more ordinary, a little more empty, without those bobbing, horned silhouettes and the soft crackle of their light. There is one more sound the deep night might offer, and it belongs to a different kind of reformer entirely. One who didn't wear a hood, but carried a conviction as sharp as any blade. This one was often a solitary figure, a woman perhaps, who had had enough of the red lantern's welcome, and the slow ruin she saw in the faces of the men stumbling home in the early hours. She worked, not with a rope or a lantern, but with a hatchet, and her battlefield was the saloon at its most defenseless hour. Imagine it's about 3 a.m., that time when even the most determined drinkers have finally given up, and the barkeep has shuffled off to his cot in the back room. The saloon is dark, the ghost of cigar smoke still hanging in the air, the glasses sticky and unwashed on the bar. Suddenly, there is a sound so out of place, so sharp and crystalline, that it would jolt you from your sleep if you lived nearby. It's the jagged crash of shattered glass, a mirror perhaps, its silvered back split into 100 shards, each one still holding onto a little of the lamplight from the street. Then another crash, and another, a rhythmic, purposeful destruction. The smell that follows is immediate and powerful, the sharp tang of spilled sin. Whiskey, rye, bourbon, all running together across the floorboards in a fragrant river that would make a deacon weep. For a few moments, the splintering of wood and the tinkle of glass is the only music in the room. A hatchet rises and falls, not with rage, but with a calm, almost liturgical regularity, as if each broken bottle were a prayer answered. The pooled liquor gleams in the bar of moonlight that slants through the window, and the air becomes so thick with the fumes of alcohol that you could almost feel tipsy just breathing. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stops. The figure steps back out onto the boardwalk, the hem of a long skirt trailing through the spilled whiskey, and disappears into the pre-dawn hush, leaving behind a damp, glittering wreckage that would cause a mighty confusion when the sun came up. It was a different kind of justice, meted out not by a committee, but by a single, furious hope, and the only trace it left was that sharp, sweet smell and the sound of broken glass crunching underfoot. All across the frontier, you see, the night was a keeper of secrets. These were not the cheerful secrets of a storyteller's yarn around the hearth, nor the companionable silence of two sweethearts on a porch. They were the quiet, necessary shadows of a society stitching itself together with whatever thread it had at hand. The distiller in his hidden holler, the night hawk and his silent rope, the lantern-lit riders with their grim purpose, the horned men of the Ozarks, looking for all the world like a fever dream, the reformer and her singing hatchet. Each one was a sign that the law of the land was still a young, wobbly thing, and in the space between what was legal and what was right. The night bloomed with a strange, improvised order. As you finally turn back toward the little town, following the scent of your own hearth now, you can carry these images with you, not as terrors, but as pieces of a vast, sleeping puzzle. The wind picks up again, ruffling the dust at your feet, and somewhere far off, a dog barks once, twice, and then is silent. The very last of the lanterns has been turned down now, and the world is nothing but silhouette and starlight, rocking gently toward the dawn, carrying its secrets like a lullaby. Now, after that distant bark fades into the deep, blue-black silence, imagine you aren't just a wanderer passing through a sleeping town at bedtime. Imagine instead that you're a child tucked onto a thin mattress of corn shucks, inside a thick-walled blockhouse, somewhere out on the Kansas prairie, with the door barred and all the neighbors pressed shoulder to shoulder in the dark. The air inside is close and smells of pine tar caulking, dust from the floor rushes, and the faint metallic ghost of cold rifle barrels. You can feel your mother's hand resting lightly on your back, her thumb moving in a tiny circle, the only movement in the entire room. And you can hear, beyond the log walls, a stillness that feels almost like a held breath, as if the whole night has leaned in to listen. The dog's bark, you see, was the signal that turned the world to stone. It wasn't a bark of warning, not necessarily, just a single, sharp note thrown out into the void. But in that one sound, every ear inside the blockhouse pricked up, and every pair of lungs stopped mid-inhale. The tense silence that fell when a distant dog barked, and every breath was held, was a silence so complete, you could have sworn you heard the starlight settling on the roof shingles. The young man by the gun loop stopped the slow chew of his tobacco and let it rest in his cheek like a pebble. Somewhere in the gloom, a baby whimpered once, and was instantly shushed by a soft hum that was barely more than a vibration against its skull. You lay perfectly still, your own heartbeat suddenly very loud in your ears, and you listened to the dark outside, as if it were a story you could read with your skin. The fear was real, of course, woven into the very geography of the frontier during those years of the Indian Wars, when scattered homesteads fought it up as naturally as the sun went down. But in the steady, patient recall of memory, it wasn't the fear that stayed with people. It was the closeness, the way a dozen different families could breathe as one. A floorboard would creak somewhere in a dry, startling snap, and every spine would tighten, then slowly ease, when old Mr. Halstead's gravelly whisper came from the corner. That was just me, moving my rheumatic knee. Go back to sleep. A soft, relieved chuckle would ripple through the room as quietly as a feather drifting across a pond, and the children, who had been wide-eyed in the blackness, would feel a delicious shiver of something half excitement, half comfort, knowing that all the grown-ups were awake and watching. Time moved differently in that suspended state. You could count the aching seconds between the far-off yip of a coyote and the answering silence, and each one felt as long as a lesson at the kitchen table. The blockhouse logs, still seeping a faint, sappy scent from their axe cuts, seemed to sigh now and then with the cooling of the night. Someone would shift a wool blanket, and the soft rasp of homespun against rough boards was a reassurance that the world was still turning in its small domestic way. And then finally, almost without anyone deciding, the tension would begin to dissolve. The dog wouldn't bark again. The only twig to snap would be under the paw of a passing raccoon that nobody would ever know about. Sleep, that patient old friend, would creep back through the crowd like a gentle tide, reclaiming each person one by one. Your father's next exhale would come out as a peaceful, rumbling snort, and even the man at the gun loop would close his eyes and lean his forehead against the cool, dusty chinking, counting the beats until dawn with a kind of prayer in his breathing. But there were other kinds of signals in the night. Signals that meant sanctuary, not siege, and they shone out across a different kind of dark field. Picture now a landscape folded into the wooded hills of the Ohio River Valley, in those antebellum years when the frontier was slipping eastward into farms and villages, and the night held a secret, glowing geography all its own. Here, on a moonless night, the soft flicker in the window that whispered sanctuary across the dark field was a single candle placed in an upper pane of a modest frame house. To a passerby, it would have looked like an ordinary domestic glow, perhaps a mother sitting up with a fretful child. But to someone who had been traveling in the shadows of the woods for hours, guided by nothing but the rustle of dry leaves and the whispered directions, passed from one safe heart to another, that little flame was the whole world's welcome. Imagine you're standing just inside the tree line, your feet aching in worn-through brogans, the damp of a creek you crossed an hour ago, still soaking your trouser legs. The house is a dark, still shape against the charcoal of the hills beyond, and you see that one small rectangle of yellow light, as steady and patient as a mother waiting up. It doesn't blink or waver, it just burns, a tiny sun in the 2-inch universe of a sash window. This was the sign that meant you could cross the open ground, that the people inside were part of the great, invisible network of the Underground Railroad. The signal was often reinforced by another sound, one so common that it melted into the night like butter on warm bread, the low, trembling hoot of an owl. But it wasn't an owl. It was a station master, or a conductor shaping his hands around his mouth, sending the call out into the timber as gently as a lullaby. And hearing that soft 3-note question, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? You would feel the knot in your stomach begin to loosen, because it meant the path was clear, the candle was lit for you, and food and a hidden corner of a barn loft were waiting. The approach across the field was the quietest walk a person could ever take. The grass was wet with dew, and it soaked your ankles in a silent, cool baptism. You kept your eyes on that candle, that holy little flicker, and it seemed to grow slightly larger with each careful step, as if the flame itself was leaning toward you in encouragement. When you reached the garden gate, which had been left off its latch, you could smell the wood smoke from the kitchen fire, and, perhaps, the faint, sweet scent of baking that had finished hours ago but still clung to the air like a promise. A door would open with no more noise than a cat's footfall, and a silhouette would usher you inside, where a cup of cold buttermilk and a quilt thrown over a straw pallet were the whole of heaven. And then the candle in the upper window would be pinched out, and the house would return to its innocent dreaming darkness, its secret already folded safely into the heart of the night. And sometimes, in the small hushed hours, when a town sleeps deepest, there came a different kind of signal, one that was meant for no one's solitude, but for the survival of the entire community. In a wooden frontier settlement, where the main street was a double row of tinder-dry storefronts and houses, the constant quiet dread was not of raiders but of fire. Every night, while the rest of the world pulled quilts over its head, a watchman walked his slow, patient circuit, a figure in a worn coat carrying a lantern that swung in a gentle, hypnotic arc. His duty was to call the hour, to test the locked doors, and to search the velvet darkness for the very first curl of smoke, that thin, treacherous ghost that could mean disaster. But from the perspective of a child dreaming in a back bedroom, the call that pierced your dreams, the orange glow that meant, "Run for the bucket brigade," was a thing heard at a great distance, muffled by the layers of sleep and log walls, so that it arrived in your consciousness like a message from another world. Imagine you're lying in that deep, dreamless trough of the night, somewhere around 2 a.m. The house is perfectly still, and you've been adrift on a soft, dark ocean of nothing at all. Then, very far away, as if from the bottom of a well, a voice rises and falls. 3 o'clock, and all's well. The sound is so familiar, so woven into the fabric of the night, that it barely registers. It's simply the clock of the town striking a human note. But on a night when the wind shifts and carries a sharper edge, that same voice might crack suddenly into a different register, a single word that lifts every soul out of its bed before the mind even understands what it means. Fire! The cry stretching out, mournful and urgent, but to your sleeping ears, it first comes as little more than an odd, lonesome sound, something between a loon's call and a question. Then, as you blink awake, you see it through the window. Not a roaring inferno, but a soft, orange glow pulsing against the underside of the smoke clouds, like a candle held up to a piece of amber glass. The shutters of your room are painted with a dim, ruddy light that trembles and wanes. Your mother's voice is calm, a hand on your shoulder, saying only, "Show's on, now, and follow me." And when you step outside, the scene is not one of wild panic, but of a town already organizing itself into a single, rhythmic body. The bucket brigade is forming in a long human chain that stretches from the town well to the burning building, which is usually just a structure on the edge of Main Street. Its timbers crackling with a sound more like a faraway waterfall than a monstrous roar. Men, women, even older children in their nightshirts and unlaced boots fall into place without a word of command. The buckets, leather, wooden, whatever had been stored by the door, begin to move, hand to hand, in a steady, patient cadence, a communal heartbeat. There is a kind of gentle, somber choreography to it. You take a sloshing bucket from your left, the water shockingly cold against your palms, and you pass it to your right, where the next pair of hands receive it and send it onward. The line sways slightly as people find their rhythm. Someone stumbles on a rut in the dark, a bucket slops, and a low, understanding mutter passes through the line. The orange glow licks up into the night, painting everyone's faces with a warm, flickering light that makes them look both ancient and utterly serene. The horses, stabled down the block, nicker softly, unsettled by the smell of smoke, but soothed by the ceaseless human murmur. Even the dogs, which had begun barking in a frantic chorus, soon settle into a watchful, whining quiet, as if they, too, trust the pattern of the work. You can hear the hiss of water on hot timber, a sound like a long, relieved breath, and clouds of steam billow up, white and woolen, to mix with the darker smoke. And then, almost before you know it, the work is done. The fire has been contained. The charred skeleton of the building stands glistening in the first grey hint of dawn, and the bucket brigade dissolves as quietly as it gathered. People pat one another on the back with damp, grimy hands, and drift back to their homes, their footsteps slower now, heavy with a good communal tiredness. The watchman, his coat smelling of smoke and his throat raw, resumes his solitary walk, just as the eastern sky turns the color of a hummingbird's throat. The cry that pierced your dreams, the orange glow that seemed ready to devour the world, have both melted into a memory that will be told over breakfast, between syrupy bites of flapjack as a close call, and a reminder that the town, when the darkness tried its hardest, knew how to breathe as one. And so the night, with all its hidden silences and little lights, would pass once more into the pale wash of morning, leaving only the soft memory of a held breath, a candle in a window, and the faint, faraway echo of a bucket brigade's song, rocking gently toward the dawn. And yet, just beyond that comforting circle of candlelight and the slow, steady breathing of your sleeping family, a different world was clocking in for its nightly shift. It was a world that paid no mind to the cracks of your log walls or the latch on your door. It was the untamed, non-human frontier, and it came alive the moment the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon. Imagine, if you will, stepping out of that stuffy, sleep-warm cabin and into the cool, velvet dark. The first thing you might notice is the silence, but it's a different kind of silence than the one inside. It's a held-breath quiet, a listening quiet, and it's full of unseen things. You don't walk far, just to the edge of the yard where the domestic world gives up and the wild timber begins. The ground under your bare feet is cool and damp, and then, from the ink-black thicket, you see them. A pair of tiny, fiery eyes, staring down at you from the low branch of a sycamore. They're unblinking, glowing like two embers that have broken off from the hearth and floated into the woods. Your heart gives a little stutter, that old instinctive jolt of being watched. A raccoon, maybe, or a possum, its gaze reflecting the starlight in a way that seems too intelligent, too knowing. For a long moment, you and the creature are held in a silent conversation, a little standoff between the fire tender and the wild. Then, as softly as it appeared, the pair of eyes blinks out, and you hear the faintest rustle of leaves as it turns away. A tiny demon of the dark timber, who was just as curious about you as you were about it. Your eyes, now adjusting to the deeper dark of the forest floor, catch something else. A faint, ghostly green glow, pulsing softly from the side of a decaying old oak stump. It's a patch of foxfire, a bioluminescent fungus that feeds on rotting wood. There's no heat to it, no flicker of a flame, just a steady, spectral radiance, the color of a shallow sea in a dream. It was said, and you might have heard your older brother swear it was true, that this light could be so bright you could hold a newspaper up to it and read about the doings back in Washington City. You didn't have a newspaper, of course, and it was likely just a tall tale. But standing there in the profound darkness, the glow did seem impossibly brilliant, a little spill of starlight trapped in a log. It was the kind of light that children used to paint on their faces to spook each other, running through the trees, shrieking with laughter that was only half a performance, the other half a genuine thrill of the uncanny. The forest floor was lit without a single spark, a miracle of decay and dampness that seemed, in that moment, like a quiet sort of magic. Now, as your senses stretch out into the night, a sound pricks the silence. It's the call of a bird, clear and sweet. You tilt your head, recognizing the bright three-note phrase of a meadowlark. A strange thing to hear well past midnight. You listen again, and before you can place it, the song shifts, melting into the chatter of a bluebird, then the scolding cry of a jay. You almost laugh, a soft, silent puff of air because you've been fooled. It's not dawn-breaking. It's the 2 a.m. bird, the master of night song, the mockingbird. Perched somewhere high, just outside your bedroom window, he's running through his entire repertoire, a feathered jukebox of every melody he's ever stolen from the daylight. During mating season, this concert could go on for hours, a tireless, liquid stream of borrowed music. Imagine you lying on your cornshuck mattress, your mind fuzzy with sleep, hearing the unmistakable song of a cardinal right outside. For a moment, your brain, desperate for morning, might convince your body it's time to start the chores. But the soft snoring of your sister beside you, the deep, settled darkness of the room, corrects you. It's just the trickster, the collector of songs, singing to the moon, and, incidentally, to you. He stole everyone's melody and played it back in the small hours, a private concert that was as beautiful as it was confusing. But of all the night voices, there was one more reliable than any clock. If you could set your pocket watch by anything, had you owned one, it would be the whip-poor-will. His song is his name, called out into the darkness, a crisp, insistent rhythm that seems to slice the night into equal, manageable sections. Whip-poor-will, whip-poor-will. It's not a gentle lullaby, not exactly. It's a demanding sort of song, a creature shouting its own identity into the void, again and again. But there is a comfort in its repetitive nature, a certainty. You could lie in your bed, warm under a bearskin robe, and count the calls, each one a tiny anchor in the vast, drifting sea of the night. One call for every slow beat of your heart. The sound is pure, resonant, and so much a part of the night's fabric that when it stops, you almost miss it, waiting in the sudden, ringing silence for the next confident declaration. It is a lullaby you could set your life to. As the whip-poor-will pauses for breath, another rhythm begins, a silent staccato, blinking in the tall grass just beyond the garden. A cool wink of light appears, drifts upward in a lazy, looping scribble, and then vanishes. Then another and another. The lightning bugs are performing their own terrestrial constellation, a low, wet spark of wonder in the warm, heavy air. If you stand very still, holding your breath, one might drift close enough to land on you. You feel it on the tip of your nose, a tiny, ticklish weight, no heavier than a single raindrop. For that 1 second, you are cross-eyed, staring at the pulsing bioluminescent abdomen that is now the center of your entire universe. It's a cool light, a living light, a tiny wet spark of creation that blinks a question into the darkness before lifting off again, its mission complete. The sight is so gentle, so quietly magical, it could pull a smile from the most weary, worried soul, a small, childlike wonder that makes the darkness feel like a gift. But sometimes the night was not just gentle and small. Sometimes it threw off its blanket and put on a show so grand it could pull you from your sleep. Picture yourself in the deepest, coldest part of the night, standing shivering in the yard in nothing but your long nightshirt. The air is crisp enough to freeze your breath in little clouds, and across the sky, a strange pale light is beginning to ripple, like a curtain of silk, being shaken by an unfathomable wind. The sky is dancing in ribbons of green and violet and soft, rosy pink. The northern lights, the aurora borealis, ripple and pulse across the vast, star-dusted ceiling of the prairie. For a frontiersman, this wasn't a forecast or a scientific certainty. It was a complete, breathtaking mystery. You'd stand there, mouth agape, the cold completely forgotten, your neck craned so far back it ached, watching those silent, celestial banners wave. It was a spectacle that felt personal, as if the sky had chosen this particular patch of prairie, this little homestead, to unspool all its secret glory. The ribbon of light would arc from horizon to horizon, folding and unfolding, and for those silent, shivering minutes, you were just a tiny, wide-eyed speck, witnessing the very firmament breathing. A much smaller, quieter spectacle happened every evening, just as the last glow of twilight drained from the west. It started as a single, erratic flutter against the purple sky. Then, another and a dozen more, until a steady stream poured from the mouth of an old abandoned mill or the dark slash of a cave in a limestone bluff. The leathery flutter of 1,000 tiny wings, a silent storm, as the bats emerged for their nightly hunt. They didn't caw or shriek like birds. They flew in a focused, silent stream, a river of shadow flowing upward to dissolve into the gathering dusk. You'd watch them, a child again perhaps, counting the swift, looping shapes as they chased invisible insects. And somewhere, an old folk healer might be watching too, not just with wonder, but with an eye to the medicine chest, knowing that these strange winged mice were sought after for their potent properties, a dark ingredient in a world of salves and poultices. But for most, it was just the evening show, a signal flare that the day was truly done, and the realm of the night creatures had officially begun, a silent, leathery storm that held no threat, only a strange, frantic grace. Of course, the very existence of so much wild mystery invited a human response, a desire to shape and control it. This is where the old folk magic crept in, a set of quiet rituals as natural as breathing. As the moon rose, you might see its blue light catch on something in the yard, a gleam that wasn't a star and wasn't a lightning bug. It was the cobalt glow of a bottle tree, a haunt-proof fence made of glass and light. The custom, carried and cherished by those of African descent, was to upturn blue glass bottles onto the bare branches of a dead tree. The cobalt glass, the color of a deep protective sky, was believed to be irresistible to malevolent spirits, to hates and boohags, and all the dark things that walked the night. The spirit, curious and drawn to the beautiful gleam, would fly into the bottle and become trapped, spinning and spilling out its malice harmlessly, until the morning sun came to dissolve it. Standing there, looking at those softly glowing bottles, you felt watched, but you also felt safe. You knew the bottles were working. Guardian angels of glass, their silent hum, a promise that nothing bad could cross that line into your home. The moonlight in the yard was a soft, blue, protective wash. And finally, there was the light you wouldn't want to trap, the one you were taught to fear. It would appear across the boggy marsh, a flickering, dancing flame, a tempting lantern that seemed to call your name. The will-o'-the-wisp, the jack-o'-lantern. It wasn't a solid lamp. It was a gaseous, shifting glow, floating just above the murky water and the patches of sphagnum moss. It lured travelers from the path, they said. A soul lost in the dark would see this friendly bobbing light and think it was a porch candle, a fellow wanderer with a lantern, or a warm, dry tavern. They'd step off the solid ground, following that silent, dancing flame, and with each step, the light would recede, just out of reach, calling your name in the voice of a friend until the cold, black bog swallowed you up. It was a story told in whispers on the porch, a legend to keep children from wandering, but standing at the edge of the marsh on a moonless night, seeing that faint, bluish flicker for yourself, you understood the warning in your bones. The tempting flame that dances just out of reach is not a promise of warmth, but a beautiful, quiet trick of the earth, a ghost story made of air and decay, and the best thing to do is to turn your back, walk inside, and lace the latch on the door. So, as you finally turn from the edge of the dark timber, or the wide, silent yard under its dancing sky, and pad back inside to the familiar smell of embers and sleep, you carry a little of that wild night with you. The ghostly green of the foxfire, the stolen song of the mockingbird, the protective blue gleam of the glass on the branch, they all settle into your memory as you crawl back under the heavy quilt. The night was a whole other country, living and breathing, right next to your world of candlelight and chores. It was a place of quiet wonder and ancient fear, lit by cool sparks and distant, dancing ribbons. You can think of it now, not as a threat, but as a beautiful, untamable neighbor, singing its strange lullabies just on the other side of the log wall. A lullaby that, once you recognize its rhythm, can rock you as gently as a boat on a calm river. Let the cool blink of a lightning bug be the last thing you picture, a tiny, wet spark of wonder, gently fading as you drift, finally, into your own deep and peaceful darkness. Imagine, for a moment, you're stepping across the worn floorboards of a kitchen you've known all your life. The square of window above the dry sink is a pane of purest black, but the room around you no longer swims in wavering, smoky shadow. On the table inside a glass chimney that's warm but not too hot to carefully touch, a single flame is standing perfectly, impossibly still. This is the new light, the coal oil flame. If you had lived your childhood squinting at your darning by the nervous yellow dance of a tallow dip, or breathing the greasy, muttony breath of a Betty lamp, this new kerosene glow was nothing short of a quiet revelation. It was a pale, steady perfection that pushed back the dark for good, or at least for a whole lot further. You could hold your needle up to its clear, unwavering face and find the eye on the very first try. You could open a book, perhaps that thick, spine-cracked volume of Ivanhoe that Uncle Will had carried all the way from Ohio, and the words would sit still on the page, not jumping and jittering like tadpoles in a jar. The flame was a bright, white gold petal, a tame and perfect little soul that asked only for a clean chimney and a turn of the wick, so low maintenance that you could almost forget the centuries of scraping and saving rendered fat that came before. It was a new kind of quiet to work by. The hiss of the lamp was so soft, it was barely a sound at all, more like the faint memory of a whisper, the gentle push and pull of air that let the light breathe. You could hear the tiny, precise snick of your scissors through the calico now, the scratch of a pencil as your brother puzzled over a letter, the far-off, rhythmic chirr of a nightjar beyond the glass, a sound you might have missed in the old sputtering days. This new light didn't just change the room, it changed what a room could be. It gave the evening a kind of polite extension, a quiet visa to stay up a little later, to talk a little longer, to see the faces around you, not as a gallery of Rembrandt portraits, gilded and flickering at the edges, but as the steady, beloved, known people in your life. You could see the fine flowery lines on your mother's knuckles, the exact shade of cornflower blue in your sister's ribbon, the way the light caught the single strand of silver threading through your father's temple as he bent over the family Bible. This was a new intimacy, a clarity that didn't feel harsh but generous. A gift of extra time wrapped in a soft, benevolent glow. But of course, the very same railways that brought the barrels of coal oil to your town's mercantile also delivered a new soundtrack to the night. It's a late summer evening, maybe a Tuesday. The lamp on the table is doing its steady work. The moths are making their gentle, papery assault on the glass. And then, from out there on the dark prairie, a sound begins to unspool. It starts low and very far away, a vibration in the floorboards before it's even a proper noise. Then it climbs, a long, mournful, high-crying wail that rises and falls with a mechanical grief, a sound entirely new in the catalogue of the world's lullabies. The distant, lonesome cry of the 10:15. Its whistle isn't a clean, modern tone. It's a breathy, steam-driven moan, a kind of harmonic sigh that seems to bypass your ears and vibrate directly in the bone of your sternum. It's the sound of a great, iron creature calling out across the miles, announcing its passage through the dark, and it makes your heart wander right out of your chest and down the tracks. You can't help it. Even if you're mid-sentence, even if you're holding a cup of warmth with both hands, that sound pulls you. Your eyes lift from your immediate circle of light and look out the window, past the reflection of your own quiet room, to a point on the horizon where you know the steel rails lie, unseen in the vastness. You picture the locomotive, a storm of sparks pouring from its smokestack, a single brilliant cyclops eye of a headlamp cutting a tunnel of light through the blue-black night. You think of the people on board, those mysterious strangers in a lighted, moving world. A man in a stiff collar, maybe, playing solitaire by the jouncing window of a palace car. A family with sleeping children, all their belongings packed in a trunk, heading for a new life further west. The whistle cries again, a tone of profound loneliness and profound motion, and for a moment you're safe. Lamplit world feels deliciously small against the backdrop of that great, connecting, continent-spanning journey. It's the wanderlust of the hearth, the ache of a journey you aren't taking, and it settles into the night along with the chirp of the crickets, a new layer in the lullaby of a world that was becoming, night by night, a little more interconnected. And that kind of interconnection, that slow gathering of the world's news, had its own special ceremony. Picture a different Friday night, down at the general store. The big plate glass window, a mark of pure civic pride, glows with the steady multiplied output of several of those new coal oil lamps. Inside, the air is a complex, wonderful perfume. The sharp, clean smell of pickles from the barrel, the earthy scent of burlap sacks full of seed beans, the metallic tang of a new axe blade, and over it all, the rich, dark, inky smell of fresh newsprint. The bundle of newspapers had arrived on the very inn whose whistle you'd heard the night before, a tight, twine-wrapped brick of words that had travelled from Chicago or St. Louis, carrying the distant world's debates and disasters and discoveries right into the lamplit store. The men of the town, and sometimes a few quiet, observant women, have gathered in a loose, attentive semicircle around the potbelly stove, even in summer, as if the stove itself were the symbolic anchor of all masculine discourse. One man, usually the storekeeper or the reverend, stands with the paper held high, the soft sputter of the oil lamp just above his head. He reads aloud, his voice finding the grand oratorical rhythm that the florid 19th century prose demands. There is talk of tariffs that mean little to the weekly price of eggs, and talk of tensions in faraway Balkan states that feel as unreal as fairy tales. But there is also news from the territorial capital, a report on the new experimental breed of wheat that might resist the rust, and this lands among the listeners with a soft good weight. There is the crackle of the fresh paper as he turns a page, a crisp, substantial sound. The listeners interject with soft hums of agreement or low, friendly grumbles of debate. Their voices are comfortable, murmuring counterpoint to the news of the world unfolding. In that lamplit store, surrounded by the smell of ink and the sputter of oil and the familiar hard-working bodies of your neighbors, the abstract roar of a great nation was filtered down into a single, audible voice, making a vast and mystifying world feel, for the length of a few columns, legible and local. But life wasn't all progress and politics. There were also the first, sweet, miraculous tastes of a world with a wider, colder reach. Imagine now that it is the 4th of July, or perhaps some church anniversary, and the warm night air is thick with the grassy scent of a mown field, and the excited shrieks of freed children. The social is happening under a canopy of oaks, and strung between the branches, swaying ever so gently, are the paper lanterns. These are not the steady, functional flames of the kitchen, but something far more magical, little moons of oiled paper, lit from within, glowing in shades of pumpkin orange and soft rose and a kind of unearthly, pale jade. They toss soft, coloured pools of light on the grass beneath them, and in the silky darkness between the trees, the local fireflies are blinking their own cooler, intermittent code, as if the earth itself were trying to compete with the new modern light show. A long folding table made of sawhorses and planks has been set up, and on it rests the night's central miracle, a hand-cranked wooden freezer, packed tight with chipped ice. Ice, in July, sawdust still clings to the slick, melting blocks, coarse and brown, and smelling of a distant, cold pine forest. This ice is a treasure, a cold ghost of January that has been sleeping all summer in a coffin-like icehouse, insulated by a thick blanket of sawdust, now awakened to perform one final fleeting show of cold. A pair of boys are taking turns on the crank, their skinny shoulders working in a rhythm, while the handle groans with the effort of churning a liquid dream into a solid one. And then the lid is opened. The dasher is lifted, carrying a hard, creamy, impossibly sweet-smelling revelation. The first scoop of vanilla ice cream, not a flavored custard or a sweetened cream, but the real, honest, incredible thing, cold and dense, and studded with the tiny aromatic black specks of a vanilla bean that had traveled further than you ever will. You take your paper cup. The vanilla hits your nose not as a simple flavor but as a whole. Complex geography, a perfume that suggested humid jungles and tropical ports and long journeys by sail. You take your little wooden spoon, a flat, almost paddle-shaped thing, and you scrape off a curl. The sensation on your tongue is a cool, sweet shock, a creamy blank slate for a flavor so profound it makes the back of your jaw ache with pleasure. You eat it slowly, far too slowly to prevent it from melting, and soon your fingers are sticky with the sweet, viscous meltwater, a badge of honor. All around you, the world hums with the soft, happy murmur of a community at ease. The paper lanterns bob their silent agreement, and a fat, slow firefly blunders right into your sticky knuckle. For a moment, its light pulsing once in confusion before it blinks off and tumbles away into the grass. The taste of sweet vanilla on a hot night, while your sticky fingers caught fireflies, was a new kind of memory being minted. A taste of a future where even the seasons could be outwitted by a little ingenuity and a block of sawdust-packed ice. And that miracle, that unprecedented mastery over the cold, had a quieter, more private expression too. Imagine the very same summer night, later now, when the lanterns are guttering and the last of the ice cream is a sweet memory on your tongue. The air is still hot, a heavy, muggy blanket that makes your nightshirt stick to your back. But your father has brought home a small, precious parcel wrapped in a burlap sack. He chips at it with a hammer on the back porch, a sound that is sharp and crystalline in the thick night air. He hands you a small piece, a jagged, imperfect diamond of pure ice. You close your fist around it, and the cold is so potent, so fundamentally contrary to the heavy, 90-degree dark, that it feels like a polite form of burning. You put it in your mouth. And there it arrives, the rare crunch of ice on a summer night. You bite down, and it cleaves with a clean, slick crack, a sound that feels imported directly from the frost line of a frozen creek. It is cold, but it is a soft cold, a pure, flavorless cold that slowly melts into a perfect mineral water stream on your tongue. You can taste the stillness of that frozen pond in the deep of last winter. You can taste the clean, metallic tang of the ice saw's blade. As you suck on this tiny shrinking iceberg, the heat of the day, the sticky residue of the vanilla, the lingering shrill of the cicadas, all of it seems to recede. What's left is a January miracle melting in the July dark. A single, perfect crunch of cold, a temporary bridge between the parched present and a season of quiet sleep, gifted to you by a train, an ice house, and a whole new world of small wonders that were making the night, once so vast and demanding, feel a little kinder, a lot brighter, and full of gentle, new surprises, swallowed down in the dark, just before your own deep and peaceful sleep. Imagine you are standing at the tail end of a century, on a wooden sidewalk you've walked 1,000 times under only starlight and the faint, buttery glow from a neighbor's window. But tonight something is different. The air doesn't just smell of dust and cooling sage, it hums. There's a new sound, a kind of busy, electric sigh, and it's coming from a glass bulb on a pole right on Main Street. This is not the soft, pulsing glow of a lamp or the lively dance of a campfire. This is the buzzing electric orb that made the stars vanish and let you stay up too late. It throws shadows sharper than any campfire ever could. Shadows so crisp and black they look like cutouts pasted onto the dirt road. You look up, and a thing that has always been true. The great, dusty river of the Milky Way, the comforting sprawl of the cosmos that had tucked in every generation before you, has begun to fade. It's not gone, not yet, but the electric glare has pushed it back, bleached it out as if someone is slowly erasing the sky. And for the first time, you can see your neighbors' faces clear as day at 10 o'clock at night, and find yourself simply not going to bed. The old rhythm, the one that sent you to sleep soon after the chickens, is suddenly optional. The night doesn't feel so vast and demanding anymore. It feels like a room that just had the ceiling raised and the lights turned on. You linger on the corner, watching a moth bat its papery wings against the hot glass, hypnotized by this new whining sun that has stolen the darkness. Now, of course, a new kind of light calls for a new kind of magic, and it arrives not long after, flickering on a bedsheet that made the whole town gasp together in the dark. Picture a livery stable, swept clean, but still holding the sweet ghosts of hay and horses. A traveling showman with a handlebar mustache has hung a wrinkled sheet on the back wall, and the whole town has crowded in, shoulder to shoulder on plank benches. The air is thick with the smell of machine oil and warm bodies. There is a clatter from the back that sounds like a sewing machine possessed, and then, a miracle. A cone of dust-filled light shoots over your head, and a picture leaps onto the sheet, grainy, silver, and astonishingly alive. A train pulls into a station, and the entire audience flinches, some letting out a little shriek. A mistake-oed comedian trips over a bucket, and a wave of laughter rolls through the stable, a sound so pure and collective it feels like a single organism breathing. It's the flicker on a bedsheet that made the whole town gasp together in the dark, a shared dream where the shadows can do tricks, and the cowboys are as tall as the cottonwoods. You sit there, your mouth just a little bit open, your hands gripping the rough edge of the bench, and you are not just watching a story. You are witnessing the night itself changing its character, from a place of quiet whispers and solitary work to one of communal electric spectacle. The outside world, which once arrived only as printed words on a newspaper a week old, now gallops, weeps, and laughs before your very eyes. And then, just as suddenly, flickers out, leaving you blinking in the sudden oil lamp gloom, your head full of ghosts. But as one light flickers on, another, more ancient one, is setting in the hearts of people who see this new world and mourn the old one. Far from the buzzing orb and the flickering sheet, out where the badlands wrinkle the earth like the face of a wise elder, a brilliant moon turned the trail into a ribbon of light, so you could learn your letters. This is a different kind of staying up too late. Imagine the moonlight so bright it bleaches all the color from the sagebrush, turning the landscape into a world of silver and ink. The air is cool and perfectly still. A small group has gathered, their faces worn by a sorrow you can only guess at, and they are not looking at a moving picture. They are looking at a scrap of paper, or perhaps a piece of old canvas, on which someone has drawn symbols, not words, but a message of hope. An elder traces a shape with a gentle, calloused finger, and you follow along, your own lips moving silently. The brilliant moon that turned the trail into a ribbon of light, so you could learn your letters, is not teaching you the white man's ABCs, but a sacred language of return, a promise that the buffalo will come back, that the old life will be restored. There is no electric hum here, just the soft sound of patient instruction, the whisper of a teaching that cannot be shouted, only passed like a fragile ember from one hand to another on this silver-lit trail. It is a quiet act of defiance against the new glare on Main Street, a choice to fill the night with a different kind of future, illuminated by a far older bulb hung in the heavens. And this teaching, this desperate hope, finds its voice as the night deepens. It becomes the song that went on until dawn, echoing off the Badlands like a prayer for a different tomorrow. Picture a wide circle under that same brilliant moon, figures wrapped in simple cloth, painted with stars and moons and thunderbirds. The song begins low, a rhythmic, shuffling chant that feels like the heartbeat of the earth itself. It rises and falls, not in a melody that seeks to entertain, but in a trance that seeks to mend. The dancer's feet beat a soft, hypnotic pattern into the dust, a sound that you feel in your chest long before you hear it in your ears. This is not the raucous energy of a barn dance or the polite clapping of a social. This is a song that went on until dawn, echoing off the Badlands like a prayer for a different tomorrow, a ceremony that refuses to acknowledge the closure of the frontier. The voices crack with exhaustion, with emotion, with a faith so fierce it seems to push back the darkness with its sheer will. As the night wears on, the individual voices blur into one sustained cry, a long, keening harmony that spills over the ridges and into the canyons, a sound the landscape itself seems to absorb and then whisper back. You listen, wrapped in a blanket, and you understand that this is the sound of a world holding on with both hands, a lullaby not for sleep, but for waking into a restored morning. It is the most powerful night sound you will ever hear, a song so full of yearning, it makes the electric light on Main Street seem like a cheap and flickering thing. And in the town that sleeps fitfully under that new electric glare, another sound cuts through the night, a sound that brings no comfort, only the grim acknowledgement of reality. It is the 2 a.m. cart that squeaked of a grim duty, its passage a secret everyone kept. Picture the street silent again, the buzzing orb now just a pitiless blue eye on the empty dirt road. The saloons are finally dark, the livery stable, where the pictures flickered, is locked tight. Then you hear it, a slow, heavy creak of unoiled wheels, a sound as regular and mournful as a slow heartbeat. It's the 2 a.m. cart that squeaked of a grim duty, its passage a secret everyone kept. You don't need to look out the window to know who is driving, a man known only as the Undertaker, and you don't need to see the long, plain box in the back. The squeak tells the whole story, a melancholy metronome, marking a final journey from a lonely homestead or a back-alley doctor's office to the workshop where sawdust and pine planks await. The cart doesn't rattle. It's moving slowly, almost respectfully, its single lantern swinging a faint, jaundiced arc. And here is the strange human secret of this sound. Everyone in town hears it. The baker turning his dough, the mother rocking a feverish child, the drunk snoring in the alley. They all hear it, and they all pretend not to. It's a communal pact of silence, a quiet grace they offer the departed and their grieving families. You lie in your bed, holding your breath until the sound passes, the squeak fading by degrees as the cart turns past the livery stable and out toward the potter's field. It is a sound of profound loneliness, yet it is also a sound of a community's tender, unspoken agreement, a soft, sad rhythm that, in its own way, is the truest night song of the fading frontier. For this is what the fascinating and fading frontier night really was, behind all the dramatic silhouettes and the crackling fires. It was a time of small hours and big changes, a place where the electric hum on Main Street slowly drowned out the chirp of the crickets, where a flickering ghost on a sheet could make a whole town forget its aches for the price of a nickel, where a moonlit trail could still hold the promise of a sacred text, and where a desperate rhythmic song could try to turn back time itself. It was a world where the creak of a wagon wheel at 2 a.m. was the most honest sound of all, a quiet acknowledgement of the price of living, kept secret by everyone who heard it. Behind the great myth of the frontier were people just like you, doing what humans have always done, trying to push back the dark, holding tight to each other for warmth or for hope, chasing a new wonder, and learning to live with a little more light and a little less sky. They were thrilled by new inventions and comforted by ancient rhythms, all in the same breathless, heartbreaking, magnificent span of a single night. So tonight, as you settle into your warm bed with soft blankets, perhaps you can feel that same magic settling in the room around you. The faint glow of a device on your nightstand is just our version of that buzzing orb, the quiet hum of your home, our own song of comfort. The great, shimmering river of the Milky Way may be harder for us to see now, but it's there, waiting behind the human light, just like it was for them. The world has always been fading, and it has always been beginning again, and that is okay. The last flicker of the silent film has danced on the sheet, the final notes of the ghost dance song have echoed into silence, and the 2 a.m. cart has rounded the bend and is gone from earshot. All that's left is the quiet hum of your own breathing and the soft, patient dark. So pull the blanket up, let the weight of 1,000 long-gone nights be a comfort rather than a story. Close your eyes and drift off. Good night.